My brother insisted I stand at the edge of family photos so I would not ruin the image. To them, I was just a 29-year-old failure living in the basement with no husband and no career. They had no idea my servers generated more revenue than 3 generations of their businesses combined. Tonight, just as I was called a disgrace, a reporter asked my father to confirm that his daughter was the youngest billionaire in America. My name is Charlotte Phillips, and for the first 18 years of my life, I was a ghost haunting the hallways of a pristine colonial house in Maple Glen. If you have ever driven through a town like Maple Glen, you know exactly what it looks like. It is the kind of American suburb where the lawns are manicured to within an inch of their lives, where the fences are white and strictly regulated by the Homeowners Association, and where success is a tangible, visible thing. Success in Maple Glen looked like a partner track at a law firm, a seat on the board of the local charity gala, or a son who played varsity football. It was a world built on appearances, on the polite nod between neighbors that silently calculated net worth and social standing. In the Phillips household, we did not just live in this world, we worshipped it. My parents, David and Margaret, were good people in the way that people are good when they follow every rule society has ever set for them. They believed in the linear path. You go to school. You get good grades in subjects that people understand. You go to a university with a recognizable name. You get a job with a recognizable title, and then you get married and replicate the cycle. I was the variable they could not solve. The realization that I was fundamentally different, and perhaps fundamentally disappointing, did not hit me all at once. It accumulated over years, like dust settling in a room that no one ever opens. But if I had to pinpoint the moment the label was officially stamped onto my forehead, it was Christmas Eve when I was 14 years old. The year was 2008. The air inside our living room was thick with the scent of pine needles and the roasting turkey my mother had been basting since 6 a.m. The fireplace was crackling, a perfect picture of domestic bliss that my mother worked tirelessly to curate. The tree was a towering evergreen, draped in heirlooms and expensive glass ornaments, with a mountain of gifts spilling out onto the Persian rug. My cousins were there, 3 girls with shiny hair and loud laughs, tearing into boxes wrapped in silver and gold paper. They shrieked with delight as they pulled out cashmere sweaters, designer perfumes, and the latest handbags. My aunt and uncle beamed, sipping their eggnog, nodding approvingly at how well the girls were growing up. Then it was my turn. My mother handed me a heavy rectangular box, her smile tight and hopeful. I knew what she wanted me to find inside. She wanted me to pull out a dress, maybe something velvet for the winter formal, or perhaps a set of high-end makeup brushes so I would finally start painting my face like the other girls in my grade. I tore the paper. It was a box of computer components. Specifically, it was a high-performance motherboard I had circled in a catalog 3 months prior, along with a static-proof bag containing 2 sticks of RAM. I had begged for this. I had made a PowerPoint presentation for my father explaining why building my own computer was more cost-effective than buying a pre-built one from the store. I looked up, my eyes wide with genuine excitement. "You got it," I whispered, clutching the cold cardboard. "This is the exact chipset I needed." The room went silent. The shrieks of my cousins died down. My aunt tilted her head, squinting at the box as if it contained a dead animal. "Is that machinery?" my aunt asked, her nose wrinkling slightly. "It is a motherboard," I said, my voice too loud in the sudden quiet. "I am going to build a dual-core system. I can finally run the compilers for the C++ exercises I found online." My father cleared his throat. Taking a long sip of his whiskey, he looked at his brother-in-law, offering a tight, apologetic smile. "She is very mechanical, like her grandfather, I suppose." "But Charlotte—" "Honey," my aunt said, her voice dripping with that condescending sweetness adults use when they think a child is slow. "Don't you want something pretty? Jessica just got that lovely vanilla perfume. You could borrow some." I looked down at the motherboard. To me, the green circuitry and the gold connectors were the prettiest things in the room. They made sense. They followed logic. Input led to output. There was no nuance, no passive-aggressive subtext. "I like this," I said firmly. The table erupted into polite, awkward laughter. It was the sound of people smoothing over a social gaffe. My mother reached out and patted my hand, her fingers fluttering nervously. "Oh, stop it," Mom said, addressing the room but looking at me with pleading eyes. "Charlotte is just going through a phase. You know how it is. Next year she will be asking for heels and worrying about boys just like everyone else." "I don't think so," I muttered, but no one heard me, except for Ethan. My brother Ethan was sitting on the arm of the sofa, looking like he had just stepped out of an Abercrombie catalog. He was 17, the golden prince of Maple Glen High. He was the starting quarterback, the student council treasurer, the boy every father wanted his daughter to date. He had opened his gifts earlier, a new leather duffel bag for away games and a set of golf clubs. Ethan looked at me, then at the computer parts, and shook his head with a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. It was a grin of pity. "I don't know, Mom," Ethan said, his voice carrying that easy confidence that comes from never having been awkward a day in your life. "I think we might just have to accept it. Charlotte is going to be the family technology embarrassment. While I am out closing deals, she is going to be the weird IT lady in the basement fixing the printer." He said it as a joke. Everyone laughed. My father chuckled the loudest, relieved that Ethan had broken the tension with his charisma. "The family embarrassment," Dad repeated, testing the phrase. "Well, as long as she can fix the Wi-Fi, right?" They moved on. The conversation shifted to Ethan's chances at the state championship and his applications to business schools. But I sat there, freezing cold despite the fire, clutching my motherboard. The label had been applied. Family embarrassment. It wasn't said with hate. It was said with certainty. It was a fact they had all just agreed upon. Like the weather or the stock market. From that day on, the divide in the house became physical. The living room was the shrine of the Phillips family legacy, specifically, the Ethan Phillips legacy. The mantelpiece above the fireplace was crowded with his achievements. There were gold trophies for football, polished until they gleamed. There was his most valuable player plaque. There was a framed photo of him shaking hands with the mayor. These were the things my parents understood. A trophy meant you won. A handshake meant you were important. It was a language of success that translated easily to their friends at the country club. "Oh yes, Ethan brought home another cup," my father could say, and everyone would nod in admiration. My achievements were different. They were quiet. They were printed on paper or existed on a screen. In 8th grade, I won the regional math Olympiad. I brought home a heavy glass obelisk and a certificate. My mother said, "That is nice, honey," and placed it on the sideboard for 2 days. By the 3rd day, it had migrated. By the end of the week, I found it on the very top shelf of the bookcase in the den, shoved behind a stack of old encyclopedias. You couldn't see it unless you stood on a chair. When I won the state science fair for a project on data compression algorithms, the medal ended up in a drawer in the kitchen, buried under takeout menus and spare batteries. I began to understand the unspoken rule of our household. If you cannot explain it in 5 seconds to a neighbor while walking to the mailbox, it does not count. My son is the quarterback, takes 2 seconds to say, and garners instant respect. My daughter optimized a sorting algorithm to reduce processing latency by 40%, takes too long, uses words they find boring, and elicits confused stares. Therefore, it was better to hide it. It was better to pretend I was just studious, rather than admitting I was obsessed with a world they found alien. I tried to fit in. Initially, I really did. I bought a dress for the sophomore dance. I tried to talk about celebrity gossip at dinner, but it felt like wearing a costume that scratched my skin. I would sit at the dinner table, listening to Ethan recount a play-by-play of his practice, watching my father's face light up with a pride that never appeared when I spoke. "Coach says I have the best arm he has seen in 10 years, Ethan would say, helping himself to more potatoes. "That is incredible, son," Dad would beam. "You know, I was talking to Jim from the bank, and he said the alumni network is watching you closely. That is your ticket. Ethan, relationships, People skills. That is what runs the world. I looked down at my plate. I wanted to say that code runs the world. I wanted to say that the bank Jim worked for relied on databases that people like me built. I wanted to say that without the silent, invisible architecture of software, their relationships would have no phone lines to travel on. But I said nothing. I just pushed my peas around and waited to be excused. The breaking point came a year later. On a rainy Tuesday evening, I had come down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. It was late, past 11 at night. The house was dark, but the light from the range hood was on, casting a yellow glow over the granite island. I heard voices before I saw them. My parents were standing there, sharing a late-night pot of tea. They thought everyone was asleep. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, shrinking back into the shadows. I knew I should announce myself, but the tone of their voices froze me. They were using their serious problem voices. "I am just worried, David," my mother said. Her voice sounded tired. "She spends all her time in that room. The glow from those monitors, it is not natural. Mrs. Henderson asked me today if Charlotte was seeing anyone, and I had to lie. I had to say she is focusing on her studies. But for how long?" "She is smart, Margaret," my father replied, though he sounded unconvinced. "Her grades are perfect. Book smart, yes," my mother sighed. "But she has no spark, no social grace. Look at Ethan. He walks into a room and he owns it. Charlotte walks into a room and looks for the exit. How is she going to survive in the real world? Who is going to hire someone who can't look them in the eye because she is thinking about numbers?" "She will find a niche," Dad said, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand. "Some back office thing, maybe accounting, or research, something where she doesn't have to talk to clients." "I just don't want her to be lonely," Mom said, and the pity in her voice hurt more than any insult. "But we have to be realistic. We can't expect her to have the kind of life Ethan is going to have. We need to manage our expectations. Don't let her get her hopes up about those big tech schools in California. It is too far, and she is too fragile. Let her go to the state college. Stay close to home. We can keep an eye on her." "You are right," Dad agreed. "We need to steer her toward reality. No more of this changing the world nonsense she talks about. She needs a safe, quiet job. Something small. Something small." I stood there in the dark, my hand gripping the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't broken. I was just operating on an operating system they were too outdated to read. They looked at me and saw a defect. They saw a social liability. They saw a girl who needed to be managed, protected, and kept out of sight so she wouldn't embarrass the family name with her awkwardness. They were planning a small life for me, a life of back office things, a life of staying close to home so they could apologize for me for the rest of my days. I turned around and walked back up the stairs, silently. I didn't get my water. My throat was dry, but my mind was burning. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I sat down in front of the desk I had built myself. I pressed the power button on the computer tower I had assembled from those embarrassing Christmas gifts. The fans whirred to life a steady, comforting hum. The monitors flickered on, bathing the room in a cool, blue light. This was my world, in this box. I was not the awkward sister. I was not the social failure. I was a god. I wrote lines of text that could make electricity do my bidding. I could build structures that were invisible but stronger than any house in Maple Glen. I looked at the scrolling lines of code on my screen. My family wanted to hide me. Fine, I would stay hidden. They wanted me to be the tech embarrassment. I would own that title. I typed a command, watching the cursor blink. "If I am going to be the embarrassment," I whispered to the empty room, "then I am going to be the most expensive embarrassment you have ever seen." I made a vow that night, illuminated by the artificial glow of my screens. I would not argue with them. I would not try to win their approval with football trophies or social graces. I would let them underestimate me. I would let them stick me in the corner of the family photos. I would let them think I was a failure. And while they were busy patting Ethan on the back for his handshake, I would build an empire from the basement up, I would speak the language they didn't understand until it was so loud they couldn't ignore it. They wanted realistic, I would give them a reality they couldn't even comprehend. I put my headphones on, blocking out the silence of the house, and began to type. The rage didn't make me cry. It made me focus. It made me fast. That night, Charlotte the daughter died, and Charlotte the architect was born. And nobody in that sleeping house had a clue what was coming for them. The acceptance letters arrived on the same afternoon in late March, carried by a mailman who had no idea he was delivering the architectural blueprints for two completely different universes. Ethan's envelope was thick, creamy, and embossed with the crimson crest of Rockwell University. It was the kind of stationery that whispered old money in closed-door meetings when he tore it open in the kitchen, letting out a whoop of triumph that shook the light fixtures. My mother actually wept. She held the letter to her chest, as if it were a holy relic. Rockwell was a legacy maker. It was where the sons of senators and the daughters of CEOs went to learn the fine art of shaking hands and managing portfolios. It cost $65,000 a year in tuition alone, a sum my father promised to pay with a proud puff of his chest, calling it the best investment the family could make. My letter was from the Brighton Institute of Technology. It was a standard white envelope, pragmatic and unpretentious. Brighton was not a place for socialites. It was a fortress of concrete and glass where people with dark circles under their eyes drank too much coffee and built the infrastructure of the 21st century. I had not just been accepted, I had been awarded the Turing Scholarship, a full ride covering tuition, room, board, and a research stipend. That is wonderful, Charlotte, my father said when I showed him the letter. He did not puff his chest. He sounded relieved, the way one sounds when they find a coupon for a discount on tires. A full scholarship, that is very helpful. It will make things much easier with Ethan's tuition being so high. That was the narrative from day one. Ethan's education was an investment. Mine was a discount. Ethan was going to university to become a master of the universe. I was going to a trade school for nerds to learn how to keep the lights on for people like him. Our trajectories split hard and fast, moving in opposite directions with the violence of a cracked tectonic plate. High school graduation set the tempo for the years to follow. I was the valedictorian of our class. I stood on the podium in the sweltering gymnasium, wearing the gold sash, and delivered a speech about the exponential growth of technology and the moral imperative of innovation. I looked out into the crowd, searching for my family. I found them. My mother was fanning herself with a program, looking at her watch. My father was checking his BlackBerry. Ethan was whispering something to his girlfriend, suppressing a laugh. They were physically present, but they were mentally already at the after-party. And what a party it was. My parents hosted a massive backyard barbecue that afternoon. Ostensibly, it was a joint celebration. There was a banner strung between the two oak trees that read, "Congratulations, graduates," in glittering letters, but the centerpiece of the event told a different story. On the main table, surrounded by platters of expensive catering, sat a custom-made cake shaped like a football, decorated with the Rockwell University logo and the words "Quarterback 1" written in icing. Tucked away on a side table, next to the plastic forks and napkins, was a sheet cake from the grocery store that simply said, "Good luck, Charlotte." So, Brighton. My uncle bobbed his head at me, balancing a beer on his knee. Is that a vocational school like for fixing computers? It is an engineering institute, I corrected him, keeping my voice level. I will be majoring in computational physics and electrical engineering. Right, he said, his eyes glazing over instantly. Hey, did you hear your brother is already rushing Theta Chi? That is the same fraternity your dad was in. Imagine the connections he's going to make. The connections. That was the currency of Ethan's world. Over the next 4 years, while I disappeared into the brutalist architecture of Brighton, Ethan flourished in the manicured courtyards of Rockwell. We lived in parallel dimensions. Ethan's phone calls home were loud and frequent, usually on Sunday afternoons. He would recount tales of tailgate parties, ski trips to Aspen with his fraternity brothers, and summer internships at prestigious firms where he mostly fetched coffee, but wore a $3,000 suit while doing it. He talked about networking and synergy and market sentiment. My parents ate it up. They repeated his stories to anyone who would listen, framing his drinking binges as socializing and his average grades as focusing on the big picture. My phone calls were different. I would call on Tuesday nights, usually taking a break from a 40-hour coding marathon. I would try to explain that I had just secured a spot in the quantum computing lab, or that I was beta testing a new neural network architecture. "That sounds complicated, honey," my mother would say, her voice tight with boredom. "Are you eating enough? You sound pale. I hope you aren't spending all day in front of those screens. You know it is bad for your skin." "I am fine, Mom. I actually just published a paper in the IEE journal." "That is nice. Oh, did I tell you Ethan met a girl whose father is the CEO of Delta Corp? We are thinking they might invite us to their summer house." I stopped mentioning the papers. I stopped mentioning the dean's list. I stopped mentioning that I was building things that could rewrite the encryption standards of the entire banking industry. I learned to edit my life down to bite-sized, palatable chunks that would not disrupt their worldview. "School is fine," I would say. "The weather is cold." Then came college graduation. This was the moment where the divergence became a canyon. Ethan graduated in May. The entire extended family flew out to Rockwell. They rented a 12-bedroom Airbnb. They threw a dinner at a steakhouse where the bill was higher than my annual research budget. They toasted to Ethan's degree in business administration, celebrating his job offer from Northbridge Capital, a mid-tier investment bank that my father spoke of as if it were the Federal Reserve itself. My graduation was 3 weeks later. I was graduating with a dual degree, summa cum laude, with a departmental award for innovation in distributed systems. I had sent the dates to my parents 6 months in advance. I had reminded them 3 months in advance. I had sent a calendar invite 1 month in advance. 2 days before the ceremony, my mother called me. She sounded frantic, the kind of frantic that is actually a cover for guilt. "Charlotte, honey, something terrible has happened," she said. Ethan's regional semifinal game for the Alumni League was rescheduled. It is a huge deal. Scouts from the National Corporate League are going to be there. If he plays well, it could mean a huge promotion at the bank. I stood in my dorm room, looking at the cap and gown hanging on my door. I knew exactly what was coming. "You are not coming," I said. It was not a question. "We tried to find a way to do both," she lied. I knew she was lying because there were no flights that could bridge the gap in time. They had looked at my summa cum laude and Ethan's alumni football game, and the scale had tipped in favor of the boy throwing the ball. "Your aunt is sick, so she can't go either, but we are so proud of you, really. We will send a card, and maybe we can do a nice dinner when you come home to visit." "It is fine," I said, my voice frighteningly calm. "I understand. Prioritize the game." I walked across the stage alone. When the dean called my name and listed my honors, the applause was polite but thin. I looked out into the sea of parents waving flowers and recording videos, and I saw 3 empty seats in the 4th row where I had reserved tickets. It hurt. I will not pretend it did not hurt. It felt like a physical blow to the chest, a hollowing out of my ribcage. But as I sat back down, clutching my diploma, the pain hardened into something else. It crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. They were not there to see me. Fine. That meant they were not there to see what I was capable of. That meant they were not watching. And if they were not watching, they could not stop me. Post-graduation life solidified our roles. Ethan became the golden boy of Northbridge Capital. He moved into a sleek apartment in the city, leased a German sports car, and started wearing watches that cost more than a Honda Civic. He was the star of every family gathering. He brought home stories of mergers and acquisitions, of closing deals over scotch, of bonuses that were fat. "Ethan is killing it," my father would say, slapping him on the back. "He is a shark, a real killer." I moved back into my parents' basement in Maple Glen. To them, This was the ultimate proof of my failure. While Ethan was conquering the city, Charlotte had retreated to the womb. They did not understand that I was not hiding. I was incubating. I did not want a corporate job. I did not want a boss. I wanted to build. I took contract work for startups nobody had heard of. I spent my days and nights in the basement, surrounded by humming servers and tangle of cables. When I emerged for dinner, I was usually wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, my hair tied back in a messy bun. "So, Charlotte," my uncle would ask at Thanksgiving, carving the turkey with a flourish. "Still doing the computer thing. What is it you do again? Fix websites." "I work on data modeling algorithms," I would say, keeping it vague. "Right. Data." He would nod, clearly bored. Then he would turn to Ethan, his eyes lighting up. "Ethan, tell us about that acquisition you handled last week. I heard the commission was huge." "Oh, it was a beast," Ethan would say, leaning back, swirling his wine. "We had to leverage the debt structure against their overseas assets. Total power move. The VP took me out for cigars afterwards. Said I have partnership material written all over me." "Incredible," my mother would sigh, looking at him with adoration. 30 years old and already talking partnership. You are going to run that place someday." Then she would look at me, her expression softening into that familiar, suffocating pity. "And you, Charlotte? Any prospects?" Maybe Ethan could speak to the IT department at Northbridge. "Get you a help desk interview. It would be good to get you out of the basement, get you some benefits." "I am fine, Mom," I would reply, taking a bite of dry stuffing. "I have a few projects in the pipeline." "Projects," she would echo, the word dripping with doubt. "Well, just don't wait too long. Life passes you by while you are staring at a screen." They saw a failure. They saw a glitch in the family programming, a daughter who had gone off the rails and ended up a recluse. But I saw the truth. The obscurity was a gift, because they thought I was doing nothing. They asked no questions, because they thought I was a failure. They did not demand my time, because they dismissed my work as fixing websites. They never asked to see my bank accounts. They never asked about the patent applications I was filing. They never asked about the intellectual property I was accruing. Ethan was living his life on a billboard, every success broadcasted and consumed by the family for their own ego. He was under constant pressure to perform, to upgrade his car, to get the next promotion, to feed the beast of their expectations. I was invisible. I was a ghost in the machine. And in the silence of that basement, while they toasted to Ethan's visible but linear success, I was building an exponential curve that was about to go vertical. They thought I was a line of bad code, a bug to be ignored. They did not realize that I was the operating system, and I was quietly rewriting the rules of the game they didn't even know they were playing. I cleared the table while they discussed Ethan's potential Christmas bonus. I washed the dishes while they debated which country club membership Ethan should apply for. And then I went downstairs, locked the door, and got back to work on the algorithm that was already processing more transactions per second than Northbridge Capital did in a year. Let them have the spotlight. I preferred the dark. That is where the real work gets done. To the outside observer, the basement of my parents' home in Maple Glen was a storage space for forgotten things. It was where the artificial Christmas tree lived for 11 months of the year, where boxes of my father's old tax returns gathered dust, and where the damp smell of subterranean earth mixed with the scent of laundry detergent. To my family, it was a symbol of my stagnation. They called it my recovery room. They told the neighbors I was taking a gap year after graduation to find myself, a polite euphemism for what they believed was a slow-motion nervous breakdown. They thought I was down there sulking, hiding from the bright, demanding world that Ethan was so effortlessly conquering. They were wrong. The basement was not a retreat. It was a foundry. While they slept upstairs, dreaming of country clubs and promotions, I was stripping the copper wiring out of discarded servers I had bought in bulk from a bankrupt data center auction in New Jersey. I built my own cooling system using dryer vents and industrial fans, rigging them to funnel the heat out through a hidden window well so the house thermostat would not spike. I turned that damp, concrete box into a fortress of high-performance computing. It did not look like much. To the untrained eye, it looked like a junk heap of wires, blinking lights, and exposed circuit boards zip-tied to metal shelving units. But to me, it was beautiful. It was a beast that I fed with electricity and code. And in return, it gave me the future. My objective was ambitious. I was writing a platform for simulated quantum processing. Real quantum computers were unstable, expensive, and largely theoretical for practical application. But I realized that for certain financial models, you did not need a real quantum computer. You just needed a classical system that could approximate the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics. I was building a system that could look at market volatility not as a linear line, but as a cloud of infinite possibilities, and pick the most likely outcome within milliseconds. The work was grueling. I lived on a schedule that ignored the rising and setting of the sun. I slept in 4-hour bursts on a cot tucked behind the water heater. My diet consisted of protein bars and instant coffee made with tap water from the laundry sink. I became a creature of the blue light, my skin paling, my eyes constantly adjusting to the scrolling waterfalls of syntax on my 4 monitors. The first validation did not come from a pat on the back or a framed certificate. It came in the form of an encrypted email from a boutique hedge fund in Chicago. They had seen a white paper I had published under a pseudonym on a niche cryptography forum. They wanted to know if my model could handle high-frequency trading simulations. They asked for a demo. I sent them a packet that predicted the fluctuation of the Japanese yen over a 12-hour period with an accuracy rate of 99.4%. 12 minutes later, they replied. They wanted a license. They attached a non-disclosure agreement. That was the moment the game changed. I realized I could not sign these contracts as Charlotte Phillips, the girl in the basement. I needed a shield. I needed a face. I drove 2 towns over to Kingsport, a gritty industrial city that Maple Glen residents only visited if they took a wrong turn. I rented a virtual office in a co-working space for $90 a month. It gave me a mailing address that sounded legitimate, Suite 404, the Kingsport Commerce Building. I called an old friend from Brighton, a law student named Marcus, who owed me a favor for helping him pass his logic exams. I need a shell company, I told him. Strict anonymity, Delaware registration. You are the registered agent. My name appears nowhere on the public filing. What are we building? Charlotte? Marcus asked. His voice hushed. Is this legal? It is entirely legal, I assured him. It is just math, but I need to be invisible. The company is called NovaQ Analytics. NovaQ Analytics. It sounded boring. It sounded corporate. It sounded like a company that sold printer toner or audit software. It was perfect. The duality of my existence became a razor edge I walked every single day. Upstairs, I was the daughter who needed to be handled with kid gloves. Downstairs, I was the CEO of a ghost corporation that was beginning to attract the attention of the sharks. I remember the night of my first major contract vividly. It was a Sunday in late November. Upstairs, the house was vibrating with noise. My parents were hosting a viewing party for the playoffs. Ethan's face was on the 60-inch television screen, helmet tucked under his arm during a pre-game interview. I could hear the cheers through the floorboards. I could hear my father shouting, "That is my boy. Look at him." I could hear the clinking of beer bottles and the laughter of neighbors who had come to bask in the reflected glory of the Phillips family. Down in the basement, the air was cold and smelled of ozone. I was wearing a hooded sweatshirt and wool socks. On my screen, a video conference window was open. On the other end sat 2 partners from a proprietary trading firm in London. They were wearing bespoke suits. They were sitting in an office that overlooked the Thames. "The latency on your predictive model is impossible," the older partner said. He looked agitated, suspicious. "We have teams of PhDs from MIT who cannot get the lag under 3 milliseconds. You are claiming sub-millisecond execution." "I am not claiming it," I typed into the chat box. I never used voice or video for myself. I claimed my microphone was broken, or that I was working from a secure server room where audio was prohibited. It added to the mystique. I demonstrated it in the sandbox environment I sent you yesterday. The data speaks for itself. If this holds up in a live environment, the partner said, leaning closer to the camera, it is worth a fortune in arbitrage alone. The license fee is $150,000 for a 6-month pilot, I typed. Non-negotiable, upfront wire transfer. There was a silence on the line. Upstairs, a roar erupted. Someone must have scored a touchdown. The ceiling shook, and dust motes danced in the blue light of my monitors. I could hear my mother screeching with delight. "Run, Ethan, run!" she screamed. "On my screen." The partner in London exchanged a look with his colleague. They nodded. "Send the contract," the partner said. "If the code works, we will talk about a long-term retainer." I minimized the window and opened the document I had prepared. I applied my digital signature, a complex cryptographic key that was the only identity I cared about. I hit send. "Done," I typed. "Wire details received," the partner confirmed. "Initiating transfer." I sat back in my squeaking office chair. I watched the progress bar on the transfer confirmation. $150,000. It was more money than my father made in 2 years at his mid-level management job. It was more than Ethan's signing bonus. And I had earned it in 10 minutes. Sitting in the dark, while they screamed at a television screen, the transaction cleared. The balance in the NovaQ business account jumped from 0 to 6 figures. I felt a surge of adrenaline that no drug could match. It was a cold, sharp, electric feeling. It was power. I closed the laptop and walked to the stairs. I needed a glass of water. When I emerged into the kitchen, the noise was deafening. The living room was packed with people wearing team jerseys. My father was high-fiving the neighbor. My mother was rushing past with a tray of pigs and a blanket. "Charlotte," she exclaimed, stopping short when she saw me. I must have looked like a wraith pale, dark circles under my eyes, wearing clothes that were 3 days old. "Oh, honey, you came up. Did you hear Ethan just threw a 40-yard pass? It was magnificent." "I heard the noise," I said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Why don't you come sit with us?" she asked, her voice dropping to that pitying whisper she reserved for me. "Mrs. Miller was asking about you. She knows of a receptionist opening at her husband's dental practice. It is part-time, very low stress. I think it would be good for you to get out of the house." I looked at her. I looked at the tray of appetizers she had spent hours preparing. I thought about the $150,000 sitting in an account she didn't know existed. I thought about the code I had just sold. Code that would likely shift the balance of the Asian markets by the time she woke up tomorrow. "I am okay, Mom," I said softly. "I have some work to finish." "Work," she sighed, shaking her head. "Just don't overdo it with the computer games. Okay, it is not healthy." I went back down. I locked the door. This pattern continued for 2 years. The basement became my universe, and the house above was merely the atmosphere I had to endure. I expanded. I bought more servers. I upgraded my cooling. The hum became louder, a constant white noise that soothed me. Novak Analytics began to grow. I hired contractors, freelancers in Estonia and India, whom I never met in person, to handle the front-end interfaces while I focused on the core engines. I started getting inquiries from larger funds. Then, from medical research institutes wanting to use my simulation engine for protein folding, I kept everything firewall separated from the Phillips family reality. My mail went to Kingsport. My bank statements were paperless. My phone was encrypted. To my parents, I was a consultant, a vague term they interpreted as unemployed but trying. One evening, about 18 months into my gap year, my mother actually came down the stairs. It was rare. She hated the basement. She said it was too cold and reminded her of a dungeon. I heard her footsteps and quickly minimized my trading dashboard. Bringing up a generic coding tutorial page I kept open for exactly this purpose. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding a basket of laundry. She looked around at the racks of blinking green lights, the tangle of black cables snaking across the floor like vines, and the hum of the fans. "It is so loud down here," she said, hugging the laundry basket. How can you think I like the white noise? I said, swiveling my chair around. She walked over and looked at my screen. She saw lines of code brackets, semicolons, variables. To her, it looked like gibberish. It looked like a waste of time. Your father and I were talking, she said, leaning against the support beam. We are worried. Charlotte, it has been almost 2 years. You are practically 30. Ethan is looking at buying a house in Summit Heights. He is moving forward. I am moving forward too. Mom, I said. Are you? She looked at me with sad, wet eyes. Honey, playing with these machines, it is fine for a hobby, but it is not a life. We just want you to be happy, but you have to be realistic. Don't set your expectations so high that you get crushed. There is no shame in a regular job. There is no shame in being average. She reached out and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. Her hand was warm, but her words were ice. I just don't want you to wake up one day and realize you wasted your best years in a basement chasing a phantom, she said. I promise, Mom, I said, forcing a smile. I am not chasing phantoms. Okay, she sighed. Dinner is in 20 minutes. Wash your hands. She turned and walked back up the stairs, the rhythm of her footsteps heavy with disappointment. I waited until the door at the top of the stairs clicked shut. I turned back to my screens. I maximized the window I had hidden. It was a proposal I had been drafting for the last 6 hours. It was a partnership offer to a pharmaceutical giant that wanted to use the Nova Q engine to accelerate their drug discovery trials. The contract value was $4,500,000. I looked at the cursor blinking at the end of the document. Don't set your expectations so high, she had said. Be realistic. I thought about Ethan's potential mortgage in Summit Heights. It was probably $500,000. He would be paying it off for 30 years. I clicked the mouse and attached the proposal. I am being realistic, I whispered to the humming servers. You just have no idea what reality looks like anymore. I hit send. The email vanished into the ether, carrying a price tag that could buy my parents' house 10 times over. I listened to the fans spin, louder and faster, as if they were laughing with me. I was not just building a business down here, I was building a nuclear weapon of success, and the countdown had already begun. They just couldn't hear the ticking over the sound of their own voices. The era of the basement coincided strangely with the era of the ascent, while I was digging deeper into the bedrock of code and quantum simulation. My brother Ethan was climbing into the stratosphere of American finance. Northbridge Capital was not just a workplace for Ethan, it was a religious institution, and he was its most devout acolyte. He had been assigned to the Mergers and Acquisitions division, the tip of the spear where the hours were brutal, the stress was lethal, and the rewards were displayed on your wrist and in your driveway. Ethan thrived there. He had the kind of aggressive, polished charm that older men in power saw as a reflection of their younger selves. He was invited to the managing director's private golf club in the Hamptons not to caddy, but to play. He learned to drink scotch that cost $400 a bottle without wincing. He learned to talk about human capital and synergistic redundancies without a trace of irony. To match this new altitude, my parents decided it was time to leave Maple Glen. They sold the house I grew up in, the house with my secret server farm still humming in the basement until the very last week, and moved to Summit Heights. Summit Heights was where you moved when you wanted to announce to the world that you had won. It was a gated community of sprawling McMansions that all looked vaguely like French chateaus or Tuscan villas. Despite being in the middle of Pennsylvania, the lawns were not just cut. They were manicured by crews of men who came twice a week. The driveways were paved with cobblestones imported from somewhere that sounded expensive. My parents bought a 5-bedroom house with a 2-story foyer and a chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of crystal. This house became the new stage for the Phillips family show. The parties became frequent and grand. They were no longer potlucks with neighbors bringing potato salad. These were catered events with waiters in black vests circulating with trays of tuna tartare and fig-wrapped prosciutto. The guest list changed, too. Gone were the high school teachers and the local hardware store owners. In their place were tax attorneys, orthopedic surgeons, and senior vice presidents of companies I had usually shorted in my simulations. I was always invited. Of course, my absence would have caused a scene, and my mother cared about optics above all else. But my presence was managed. At these dinner parties, the seating chart was a political map. My father sat at the head, the benevolent patriarch. Ethan sat to his right, the heir apparent. Next to Ethan would be his wife, a lovely, vapid woman named Claire, who had been a marketing major and now dedicated her life to the competitive sport of suburban motherhood. Then came the important guests, the people who could offer investment tips or country club sponsorships. And then, down at the far end of the long mahogany table, near the swinging door to the kitchen, was me. I sat there, usually flanked by an elderly aunt who could not hear well or a teenage cousin who had been forced to attend. It was the social equivalent of the kids' table, extended into adulthood. I remember one dinner in particular, celebrating my father's 62nd birthday. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and roast beef. The conversation at the power end of the table was booming. Ethan was recounting a recent trip to Dubai to close a deal on a logistics firm. "The heat is dry, but the money is liquid," Ethan joked, and the table erupted in appreciative laughter. We structured the deal to bypass the usual regulatory holdups, save the client about 12% in tax liabilities over the first 3 quarters. "Brilliant," a man named Dr. Sterling said, raising his glass. "That is the kind of thinking we need. Smart? Aggressive?" Down at my end, a woman named Mrs. Gable, whose husband owned a chain of car dealerships, turned to me. She had a tight, surgically enhanced smile that looked painful to maintain. "So, Charlotte," she said, her voice dropping an octave to signal that she was stepping down to my level. "Your mother tells me you are still tinkering with computers." "I work in data analysis," I said, cutting a piece of asparagus. "Oh, isn't that nice?" she said, her eyes already drifting back toward Ethan. "My nephew does that. He fixes the iPads at the elementary school. It is so good to have someone tech-savvy in the family. Isn't it? I bet you help your parents with their email all the time." "All the time," I lied, taking a sip of water. "And are you seeing anyone?" she asked, the inevitable follow-up. "A girl as smart as you, surely there is a nice engineer somewhere." "I am focusing on my career right now," I said. "Mrs." Gable patted my hand. It was a soft, pitying pat. "Well, don't focus too long, dear. Time flies. Look at Ethan. He has it all sorted out." Indeed, he did. The conversation shifted, as it always did, to the holy trinity of Ethan's existence, his bonus, his house, and his son. "The bonus pool this year is looking historic," Ethan was saying, his voice projecting easily to the back of the room. "I am looking at a payout in the mid-7 figures if the Q4 numbers hold. We are thinking of buying a vacation place in Aspen. Claire loves the skiing." "Aspen is lovely in January," my mother chirped, beaming. "You have earned it, sweetheart. You work so hard." "And little Leo." Claire jumped in, touching Ethan's arm. "We just got the acceptance letter for St. Jude's Prep. Can you believe it? The waiting list is 3 years long." But Ethan made a few calls to the alumni board. "St. Jude's, Dr." Sterling whistled. "That is the feeder for the Ivy League. Good man. Getting him on the track early." "Tuition is $40,000 a year for pre-K," Ethan said with a mock grimace that was actually a humble brag. "But hey, you can't put a price on a head start." I sat there, chewing my roast beef. $40,000. That was the rounding error on the tax bill I had paid for NovaQ Analytics the previous quarter. I had just purchased a server farm in Iceland to handle the cooling requirements for my new neural network, a transaction worth $18 million. I had done it in my pajamas, eating cereal. But in this room, I was the failure. I was the one who needed to be worried about. The climax of the evening usually came after dessert, when the guests mingled with brandy and cigars. This was when the interventions happened. My father cornered me near the patio doors. He had had 3 glasses of wine and was feeling expansive and paternal. "Charlotte," he said, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I was watching you at dinner. You were quiet. I am always quiet. Dad. I know, I know. You have always been internal, he said, searching for a word that was not weird. But look, your mother and I worry. You are almost 30. You are living in that apartment in Kingsport. It is a nice apartment, I interrupted. It was a penthouse I had bought through a Shell LLC, though I told them I was renting a studio. It is fine, he dismissed. But it is not a career, honey. Freelancing consulting. It is unstable. You need a foundation. Have you thought about what I said last week about asking Ethan? The question. The eternal, suffocating question. Why don't you let your brother save you? I don't think Ethan's world is for me, Dad, I said gently. It is not about his world, Dad said, his voice sharpening with frustration. It is about the world, the real world. He has pull. Charlotte, he could get your foot in the door. You wouldn't have to be a banker. Just support staff. Something with a 401k and health insurance. Before I could answer, the golden boy himself appeared. Ethan smelled of expensive musk and victory. He loosened his silk tie and gave me that smile, the one that won clients and charmed mothers. Dad giving you the speech? Ethan asked, chuckling. I am just trying to help her, son, Dad said. She is stubborn, just like her grandfather. Ethan turned to me, his expression shifting into something serious. He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient with a chronic, self-inflicted condition. Listen, Ethan said. Dad is right. I actually spoke to the CTO at Northbridge yesterday. We are upgrading our entire back-end infrastructure. It is a massive project. We need compliance officers, system admins, help desk leads. I mentioned I had a sister who was good with code. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. You pitched me for a help desk job. It is a lead role, Charlotte, Ethan corrected, sounding defensive. Starting salary is $85,000 a year, full benefits, 3 weeks paid vacation. And since you would be coming in as my referral, you would skip the first 2 rounds of interviews. $85,000. I made that amount every 4 hours on the royalties from my pharmaceutical algorithms alone. Ethan, that is really generous of you, I said, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. But I can't take a full-time role right now. My current projects are at a critical phase. Projects, Ethan sighed, running a hand through his perfect hair. He looked at Dad, shaking his head. She is still talking about the projects. What are these projects? Charlotte, Dad asked, his patience thinning. Can you hold them? Can you deposit them? No, they are hobbies. Ethan is offering you a lifeline. $85,000 is real money. It is more than you have ever made. I am building something, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It takes time. Ethan stepped closer, invading my personal space with his scent of success. He put his hands in his pockets and looked down at me. Char, look around, he whispered, so the guests wouldn't hear. Look at this house. Look at the life I have built. I want this for you. Not the mansion, maybe, but stability, dignity. You are living like a college student. It is embarrassing, not just for us, but for you. I am trying to help you grow up. There it was, the naked truth wrapped in brotherly love. He thought I was stunted. He thought I was a child playing with blocks while he was building skyscrapers. I looked at him. I looked at his $3,000 suit, his confident posture, the way he held his drink, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, cold vertigo. He was so proud of his position at Northbridge. He was so proud of his synergies and his leverage. He had no idea that Northbridge Capital had just signed a licensing agreement with Quantifold Systems, my company, 3 days ago. He had no idea that the back-end upgrade he was talking about was actually his company installing my software because their proprietary systems were 20 years obsolete. He was offering me a job to maintain the very machinery I had designed to replace him. He was standing on the deck of the Titanic, polishing the brass handrails, offering me a job as a stewardess, while I was the one who had designed the iceberg. I appreciate the offer, Ethan, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I really do. But I'm going to see my project through. It is a long game. Ethan let out a short, derisive laugh. Fine, have it your way. But when you wake up in 5 years and realize you are 40 years old with nothing to show for it but a hard drive full of unfinished code, don't say I didn't try. I won't, I said. You can lead a horse to water, Dad muttered, turning away in disgust. Let's go. Ethan, Dr. Sterling wants to ask you about that bond yield strategy. They walked away, back to the light, back to the laughter, back to the important people. I stood alone by the patio doors, watching them go. They looked so powerful. They looked so secure in their fortress of Summit Heights. They thought I was clinging to a childish dream, afraid to step into the real world. They couldn't see the invisible lines of code wrapping around their world, tightening, optimizing, and rendering their handshakes and golf games irrelevant. They were dinosaurs discussing the weather, unaware that the meteor had already hit the atmosphere. I took a sip of my lukewarm water and checked my phone. A notification from my bank. The quarterly dividend from my private equity holdings had just posted $2,400,000. I smiled, a small, private ghost of a smile. I am not hungry, I whispered to the empty air. I went back to the table, sat at the edge near the kitchen door, and listened to Mrs. Gable talk about her poodle's grooming schedule for another 45 minutes. I nodded. I smiled. I played the part of the family embarrassment perfectly. After all, it was the best disguise a billionaire could ask for. The scale of what I was doing changed when I realized that speed was not just an efficiency, it was a commodity. In the high-stakes world of algorithmic trading and risk assessment, time is literally money. If you can calculate a risk scenario 3 seconds faster than your competitor, you own the market. My code, the quantum simulation engine I had birthed in a damp basement, was not just fast, it was instantaneous. I had moved beyond the small boutique firms. My algorithms were now running in the back ends of hedge funds, with names that sounded like geometric shapes, or Greek gods funds that managed billions of dollars in assets, but had zero public footprint. They were using my software to reduce risk simulation times from 48 hours to 11 minutes. It was time to evolve. Nova Q. Analytics was too small a shell for the creature I was growing. I incorporated a new entity, Quantifold Systems. This time, I listed myself as CEO. It was a calculated risk, but necessary. However, I kept the address listed as a generic office suite in downtown Kingsport, a rusted steel town 40 miles away from the manicured lawns of Summit Heights. I used a registered agent service that scrubbed my personal home address from public records. If anyone looked up Quantifold, they would find a boring corporate filing in a boring building in a boring town. They would not find the daughter of David Phillips, the girl who sat at the kids' table. Then came the call from Astera Ventures. Astera was not a small player. They were a Tier 1 venture capital firm based in Palo Alto, the kind that minted unicorns and turned college dropouts into cover models for tech magazines. A partner named Silas Vance had tracked down the source of the compression engine used by one of my clients. He wanted a meeting. We met in a private conference room at a hotel near the airport. I wore a plain black suit I had bought off the rack at a department store. Silas wore a t-shirt that probably cost $400 and sneakers that were limited edition. He looked at me, then at his tablet, then back at me. "You are a ghost," Silas said, leaning back. "I have analysts who can find the blood type of a founder in 20 minutes. It took us 3 weeks to find a phone number for you. No LinkedIn, no Twitter, no Crunchbase profile. Who are you?" "I am an engineer," I said simply, "and I am expensive." Silas laughed. He liked that. We spent 3 hours going over the architecture of Quantifold. By the end of it, he wasn't laughing. He was staring at the whiteboard where I had sketched out the roadmap for our next generation of predictive modeling. "This is not just an optimization tool," Silas said, his voice low. "This is a platform layer. If this works at scale, you replace the entire risk management stack for Wall Street, and Big Pharma, and logistics. I know, I said. I want in, Silas said. Astera Ventures wants to lead your Series A round. We are talking about a valuation in the range of $300 million. We will put in $50 million for a 17% stake. $300 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract. It was the GDP of a small island nation. I have conditions, I said. Everyone has conditions. Silas waved his hand. Board seats, voting rights. Privacy, I said. Strict, total radio silence, no press releases, no TechCrunch articles, no 30 under 30 lists, no interviews. You do not announce this investment. You bury it in your quarterly report under miscellaneous strategic holdings. My name stays out of the media until I say otherwise. Silas frowned. That is unusual. Most founders want the fame. It helps with recruiting. I don't need to recruit, I said. I have a distributed team of the best cryptographers in the world, and they like the quiet just as much as I do. And I don't want the fame. I want to work. Why? Silas asked, studying me. Why the secrecy? I thought about the dinner parties at Summit Heights. I thought about Ethan's smug smile as he talked about his bonus. I thought about the way my mother looked at me with that crushing, suffocating pity. If I came out now, if I announced that I was worth $50 million on paper, the dynamic would shift instantly. They would be shocked. They would be proud. But they wouldn't learn. If I revealed myself now, the conversation would become about the money. It would be, Charlotte struck gold. It would be, Charlotte got lucky. It would be about how I could now pay for the family vacations or buy a bigger house. The lesson that they had fundamentally misjudged my worth, my intelligence, and my capacity for greatness would be lost in the glare of the dollar signs. I have my reasons, I said to Silas. Take it or leave it. We will take it, Silas said. Welcome to the big leagues. Charlotte? The irony of my dual existence deepened. While I was secretly negotiating term sheets with Silicon Valley billionaires, my brother Ethan was unwittingly becoming my customer. Northbridge Capital, the investment bank where Ethan was now a rising star, was bleeding market share. Their legacy systems were slow. They were losing deals to faster, leaner firms, desperate to stop the bleeding. Their CTO signed a licensing agreement with a third-party vendor to overhaul their risk engines. That vendor was a reseller for Quantifold Systems. I saw the contract come across my desk on a Tuesday morning. Northbridge Capital Global Markets Division. I saw the signature of the authorized signatory. I recognized the name. It was Ethan's boss's boss. I stared at the screen, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my chest. Ethan was going to be using my software. Every time he ran a simulation, every time he priced a bond, every time he boasted about how agile his team was becoming. He would be relying on the code written by the sister he thought was a failure. I signed the approval. That weekend, at a barbecue at my parents' house, the subject came up. Ethan was manning the grill, flipping burgers with a beer in one hand. He looked the picture of suburban success polo shirt tucked in, aviator sunglasses, a circle of admiring relatives around him. We are finally modernizing, Ethan announced to my uncle. The bank just brought in this new tech stack. Incredible stuff. We used to have to wait overnight for the Asian market simulations. Now, we get them in 10 minutes. It is going to change the game for my team. That is great, son, my father said, beaming. Efficiency. That is the key. Exactly, Ethan nodded. You know, there are so many of these garbage tech startups out there just burning cash, selling vaporware. But this is real enterprise stuff. It shows you that you need real business acumen to identify value, not like those kids in hoodies thinking they can code their way to billions. I sat on the patio swing, sipping iced tea. What is the software called? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Ethan glanced at me, annoyed that I had interrupted his monologue. It is called Qfold or something. You wouldn't know it. Char, it is institutional grade, not the kind of stuff you play with on your home PC. Right, I said, taking a sip. Institutional grade. You know, Ethan continued, turning back to my father. It is funny. Startups are a bubble. I was telling my clients yesterday, stay away from tech IPOs for a while. It is all smoke and mirrors. These kids make an app and think they are geniuses. But when the market corrects, only the real businesses like Northbridge are going to be left standing. You are so right, my mother chimed in, handing out napkins. Stability is everything. Charlotte? Honey? Are you sure you don't want another burger? You look thin. I am fine, Mom. I watched Ethan take a bite of his burger. Confident, arrogant, and completely ignorant. He was standing on a trapdoor that I had built, lecturing the world on the importance of solid ground. The valuation of Quantifold continued to climb. As our market penetration deepened, the smoke and mirrors my brother despised began to generate revenue streams that rivaled the GDP of developing nations. 6 months later, I received an email that made my heart stop. It was not from a client. It was from Goldman Sachs, but not the retail division. It was from their investment banking technology group. They were putting together a syndicate to underwrite our initial public offering. I sat in my apartment in Kingsport, which I still kept dark. Though now filled with Herman Miller furniture and art, I had bought at auctions anonymously and opened the attachment. It was a preliminary valuation analysis. Projected market capitalization, $4.2 billion. Founder's equity stake, 51%. I read the number again. $4 billion, with a B. If I signed this, if we went public, I would not just be rich. I would be one of the wealthiest women in the country under the age of 30. I would be on the cover of every magazine. The secrecy would end. The ghost would become a celebrity. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors washing over me. $4 billion. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Family dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Please dress nicely. Big news for Ethan. I looked at the text. Then I looked at the $4 billion on the screen. I closed the laptop. I put on a sweater that I had owned for 5 years. I drove my 10-year-old sedan to Summit Heights. When I arrived, the house was already in celebration mode. Champagne corks were popping. My father was holding a bottle of Dom Perignon that he had been saving for a special occasion. Here she is, my father boomed as I walked in. Charlotte, come, get a glass. You are just in time for the toast. What are we celebrating? I asked. Ethan was standing by the fireplace, one arm around Claire, looking like he had just been elected president. He was glowing. I got the nod, Ethan said, trying to sound humble but failing. They are making me vice president of the Northeast Division. It is official as of this afternoon. Vice president, my mother shrieked, clapping her hands. Oh, Ethan, that is, oh my God, that is huge. And the salary? Let's just say the bonus structure is significantly improved. Ethan smirked. We are looking at a total package of around $400,000 a year, plus stock options. 400,000, my aunt gasped. Ethan, that is incredible. You are set for life. To Ethan. My father raised his glass. To success, to hard work paying off, to being the anchor of this family. To Ethan. Everyone shouted. I raised my glass. To Ethan, I said softly. I drank the champagne. It was cold and dry. I looked at my brother, basking in the adoration of the room. He was so happy. He felt so big. $400,000. It was a lot of money. It was a life-changing amount of money for almost anyone. But I had just read a document that valued my net worth at $2 billion. I could have said it then. The words were right there, resting on my tongue like a loaded gun. I could have put my glass down and said, that is great. Ethan, by the way, I just received an IPO offer that values my company at $4 billion. That means I make your annual salary roughly every 45 minutes. I imagined the silence. I imagined the look on Madison's face. I imagined the glass slipping from my father's hand. But I didn't say it. If I dropped the bomb now, in the middle of his toast, it would look like jealousy. It would look like I was trying to steal his thunder. And worse, it would make it about the money. They would gasp at the billions, and they would instantly rewrite history. They would say, "We always knew she was special," they would say. "We were just pushing her to succeed." They would pivot so fast they would give themselves whiplash, and they would never, ever have to confront the uncomfortable truth of how they had treated me when they thought I was nothing. No, I wanted the truth to hit them when there was no champagne to wash it down. I wanted them to see the architecture of their own prejudice before they saw the check. "So, Charlotte," Ethan said, turning to me after the toast, feeling generous in his victory. "What about you still keeping busy with the consulting?" "Yeah," I said, swirling my glass. "Keeping busy." "You know," he said, walking over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder, "with this promotion, I am going to have a bigger budget for my department. I could really create a position for you. Seriously, no interview. Just say the word. You could quit the freelance stuff and have a real career, be part of a winning team." He was looking at me with genuine kindness now, the kindness of a king offering crumbs to a peasant. He really believed he was saving me. "I will think about it," I said. "Congratulations, Ethan, really. Thanks, Char," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "You will find your path. Just gotta get your head out of the clouds." He walked back to the center of the room to accept more accolades. I stood there, holding my glass, watching them celebrate the vice president of the Northeast Division. I felt a profound, heavy silence inside me. It was the silence of the deep ocean, the kind of pressure that crushes submarines. They were celebrating a hill while standing in the shadow of a mountain they refused to see. I checked my watch. I had a conference call with the lead underwriters in Zurich at 4 a.m. I needed to go home and prep. "I have a headache," I told my mother. "I am going to head back." "Oh, okay," she said, barely looking away from Ethan. "Drive safe. And Charlotte, maybe get a haircut. You look a little tired." "I will. Mom," I said. I walked out into the cool night air of Summit Heights. I looked back at the house, glowing with golden light, filled with laughter and applause for the wrong things. I got into my car and drove back to Kingsport. I did not turn on the radio, I just drove, thinking about the $4 billion and how cheap the truth was going to be when I finally decided to buy it. They wanted reality. I was about to buy the whole damn reality and evict them from it. The driveway of the house in Maple Glen was paved with nostalgia and arrogance. Even though my parents had moved the center of their social gravity to Summit Heights, they had insisted on hosting my father's 60th birthday back at the old house. They called it a return to roots celebration, a sentimental gesture to show how far they had come from the colonial two-story where they had raised us. But as I pulled my 10-year-old sedan in between a glossy black Range Rover and a silver Porsche Cayenne, it felt less like a celebration and more like a coronation. I was late. 40 minutes ago, I had been sitting in a sterile conference room in downtown Kingsport, flanked by 3 lawyers and a notary. I had just signed the final S-1 registration statement for the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was done. The roadshow was scheduled. The initial pricing range had been set. When Quantifold Systems hit the New York Stock Exchange in 3 weeks, the opening bell would ring for me. The valuation we had locked in was $4.2 billion. My hand was still cramping slightly from the sheer volume of signatures I had just executed. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a gray cable-knit sweater that had a small snag in the sleeve and a pair of dark jeans. I had no makeup on. My hair was pulled back in a loose, somewhat frizzy ponytail. I looked like a graduate student who had just rolled out of a library after pulling an all-nighter. I looked like Charlotte the failure. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of cold suburban air, and stepped out of the car. I walked up the path where I used to ride my bicycle, past the flower beds my mother used to tend, and opened the front door. The wall of sound hit me instantly. It was the specific, high-frequency noise of a frantic upper-middle-class gathering. It was the clinking of crystal flutes, the roar of laughter that was a little too loud, and the hum of 50 people trying to out-impress one another. The air smelled of expensive perfume, catered salmon, and desperation. I stepped into the foyer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. My Aunt Linda, who ran a boutique interior design firm and always looked as if she were smelling something unpleasant, was the first to spot me. She paused mid-sentence, her wine glass suspended in the air. Her eyes swept over me, cataloging my outfit, my hair, and my lack of jewelry in a single, merciless second. "Charlotte," she said, her voice carrying over the din. "You made it. We were beginning to think you had forgotten." "Happy birthday to Dad," I said, stepping fully into the light. "I got held up with some paperwork." "Paperwork," Linda echoed, exchanging a knowing glance with my Uncle Jerry, who owned a construction company and was currently wearing a watch the size of a dinner plate. "Well, better late than never. Although, honey, did you not see the invitation said cocktail attire?" "I came straight from the office," I lied. "The office," Jerry chuckled, shaking his head. "Right, the co-working space. How is the gig economy treating you? Kids still fixing glitches?" "Something like that," I said, moving past them. I navigated the room like a ship moving through ice. Everywhere I turned, I felt the eyes. They were not hostile, they were worse. They were dismissive. To them, I was a static character in the dynamic movie of their lives. I was the cautionary tale. I heard the whispers as I passed. "She looks tired, doesn't she? 30 years old and still dressing like a teenager? I heard she is still staying in the basement when she is not at that rental in Kingsport. It is a shame. She was such a bright student, just no drive." I made my way to the living room, the epicenter of the party, and there, standing in front of the fireplace with the ease of a monarch, was Ethan. He looked spectacular. I had to give him that. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was styled with precision, and he was holding a tumbler of scotch. He was surrounded by a semicircle of admirers, cousins, neighbors, and local business owners who were hanging on his every word. "The deal was complex," Ethan was saying, using his hand to emphasize the point. "We had to structure the debt across 3 different jurisdictions, but once we locked in the yield, the client was ecstatic. Northbridge is going to be the lead arranger on the whole infrastructure package." "Incredible," a cousin named Brad said, nodding enthusiastically. "That is a VP-level move, Ethan." "Well, that is what the title says on the door now." Ethan grinned, and the group laughed appreciatively. "But honestly, the work is the reward, although the bonus didn't hurt. We are actually booking a trip to Silver Ridge Lodge for the winter break. The whole family." "Silver Ridge," Aunt Linda gasped. "Oh, Ethan, that is exclusive. You have to be a member just to book the chalet." "We pulled some strings," Ethan said with a wink. "I want Mom and Dad to experience the best. They deserve it." My mother was standing next to him, beaming so hard I thought her face might crack. She looked at Ethan as if he were the sun, and she was a planet lucky enough to be in his orbit. "He is taking us all," Mom told the group. "Can you believe it? A week in the mountains. He is such a good son." I stood on the periphery of the circle, unseen. I thought about the document I had just signed. The IPO proceeds were structured to flow into a family trust I had quietly set up, one that would ensure financial security for every person in this room for generations. I could buy Silver Ridge Lodge. I could buy the mountain it sat on. But right now, I couldn't even get a hello. My father spotted me. He waved me over, his face flushed with wine and pride. "Charlotte," he called out, "come say hello to your brother. He was just telling us about the ski trip." I stepped forward. "Hi, Ethan. Congratulations on the promotion." Ethan looked down at me. He smiled, but it was that same pitying smile from the country club. "Thanks, Char. Good to see you. You look comfortable." "I try," I said. "Grab a drink," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen. "There is plenty of wine. Don't worry about the cost. I picked up the tab for the catering." "That is generous of you," I said. "It is the least I could do," he said, turning back to his audience. "Anyway, as I was saying, the market volatility is actually an opportunity if you know how to leverage it." I was dismissed. The circle closed ranks, their backs turning to me as they leaned in to hear more about Ethan's leverage. I drifted away, I found myself where I always found myself at these gatherings, in the corner of the dining room, next to the dessert table and the pile of guests' coats. It was the designated spot for the unimportant. The air was stale there, smelling of wet wool and chocolate fondue. I sat down on a folding chair. I watched the room. I watched my parents laughing. I watched my cousins comparing watches. It was a perfect tableau of everything I was supposed to want and everything I had supposedly failed to achieve. Enjoying the view from the cheap seats, I looked up. It was Madison. My cousin Madison was 2 years older than me, a PR executive for a pharmaceutical company, and someone who measured human value by the square footage of their real estate. She was holding a martini glass that was dangerously full. Her eyes were sharp, glazed with alcohol and malice. "Hi, Madison," I said. "How are the kids?" "They are in private school," she said, as if that were the only detail that mattered. She leaned against the wall, towering over me. "So, Charlotte, another year, another whatever this is." She waved her hand at my outfit, my general existence. "I am doing fine, Madison," I said calmly. "Are you—" She took a sip of her drink. "Because honestly, it is getting a little painful to watch. We were talking about it in the car on the way over. You are nearly 30. You are smart. Why are you still living like a sorority girl who lost her scholarship? It is weird. Charlotte, it is practically deviant." "I live simply," I said. "It suits me." "It is not simple," she snapped, her voice rising just enough to turn a few heads nearby. "It is selfish. Look at your parents. Look at how hard they worked. Look at Ethan. He is carrying the family legacy. And you are just floating, hiding in a basement. It is embarrassing for them. You know, they have to make excuses for you every time someone asks." I felt a cold stillness settle over me. It was the same focus I felt when I was debugging a complex kernel panic. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar. "I didn't ask them to make excuses," I said. "You didn't have to," Madison sneered. "Your existence is the excuse. Oh, Charlotte is just figuring things out. Oh, Charlotte is a free spirit. We all know what that means. It means you failed to launch. It means you are a burden." I looked at her. I looked at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, likely bought on credit. I looked at the anxious tightness around her eyes. She was projecting. She was terrified of sliding down the ladder, so she needed to step on someone she thought was on the bottom rung to feel tall. "Is that what you think?" I asked softly. "It is what everyone thinks," Madison said, gesturing to the room with her glass. "Ask anyone. Ask your dad. Ask Ethan. They just love you too much to say it to your face. But we all know. You are the family charity case." I stood up. I didn't do it quickly. I didn't do it aggressively. I just stood up. For 15 years. I had taken it. I had taken the jokes about the motherboard. I had taken the exclusion from the graduation party. I had taken the help desk job offers. I had taken the pity. I had swallowed it all because I thought that if I just worked hard enough, the work would speak for itself. But they were deaf. They wouldn't hear the work unless I screamed it. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Maybe it was the way I stood up. Maybe it was the sudden lack of expression on my face. But people nearby stopped talking. Aunt Linda lowered her wine glass. Uncle Jerry stopped checking his watch. Madison looked at me, blinking, sensing she might have pushed too far, but too drunk to retreat. "What, you going to cry? Go run back to the basement." "No," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a diamond cutter on glass. "I am not going anywhere." I reached into my bag. I wasn't going to pull out the papers. That was too crude. I was just reaching for my phone to check the time. But the motion drew eyes. Ethan, sensing a disturbance in his force field, looked over from the fireplace. He saw me standing toe-to-toe with Madison. He saw the tension radiating off us. He excused himself from his admirers and walked over, his face arranging itself into a mask of brotherly concern. "Hey," Ethan said, stepping between us. "Everything okay over here, Madison? You look like you need a refill." Char, you okay? Madison was just explaining my position in the family hierarchy, I said. It was very educational. Oh, come on, Ethan laughed nervously. Madison has had a few. Don't take it seriously. We are all just having fun. I am not having fun, Madison muttered, emboldened by Ethan's presence. I am just saying what needs to be said. Someone has to tell her to grow up. Madison, that is enough, my father said, appearing at my elbow. He looked tired. Let's not ruin the night. Charlotte, maybe you should go get some fresh air. Help your mother in the kitchen. There it was, the final dismissal. Go to the kitchen. Go away. Don't make a scene. I looked at my father. I looked at Ethan. I looked at Madison. I felt something click inside my chest. It was the safety latch coming off. I don't think I will, I said. My father frowned. Excuse me. I don't want to go to the kitchen, I said. And I don't want to get fresh air. I think I will stay right here. Madison wants to talk about my career. I think that is a great topic. Let's talk about it. The room went silent. The background chatter died away. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Everyone sensed the shift. The quiet girl, the furniture girl, was speaking out of turn. Charlotte, don't be like this, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a warning whisper. Not tonight. It is Dad's birthday. I know, I said. 60 years, a milestone, a time for reflection, a time for truth. You are embarrassing yourself, Madison hissed. Am I? I asked. I was about to speak. I was about to tell them everything. I was about to unleash the avalanche, but then a sound cut through the heavy silence. It was a ringtone. Not just any ringtone. It was the distinct, jarring electronic trill of my father's cell phone, the specific ringtone he had assigned to priority business. He never answered his phone at parties. Never. It was a rule. But he looked at the screen. He frowned. He looked up at us, confused. I have to take this, he stammered. It is Harold Lane, from the Business Chronicle. Harold Lane, the most respected financial journalist in the state, a man my father worshipped. Answer it, I said. My father looked at me, startled by the command in my tone. Then he pressed the green button, in his confusion, and perhaps because his hands were shaking slightly from the tension in the room. He hit the speakerphone icon. Hello, Mr. Lane, my father said into the silence of the room. Mr. Phillips. The voice on the other end was crisp, urgent, and loud enough for everyone to hear. Sorry to disturb your evening. I am running a feature for tomorrow's front page on the record-breaking IPO filings this week. I need a confirmation on a fact check regarding your daughter. My father blinked. My daughter. You mean you want to talk to Ethan, my son? No, sir, Harold Lane said. I'm talking about Charlotte Phillips. I need you to confirm that she is indeed the sole founder and majority shareholder of Quantifold Systems, the company that Forbes has just valued at $4.2 billion. The silence that followed was not the silence of a room. It was the silence of a vacuum. It was the silence of a world stopping on its axis. I looked at Madison. Her mouth was slightly open. I looked at Ethan. His glass of scotch was tilting dangerously in his hand. I looked at my father. He was staring at the phone as if it had turned into a snake. My father stuttered. 2 billion. 4 billion. Mr. Phillips, the reporter corrected. Making her the youngest self-made female billionaire in American history. Is she there? Can I get a quote? I stepped forward, moving out of the corner, moving away from the coats, moving into the center of the room where the light was brightest. I am here, I said, my voice steady, cool, and terrifyingly calm. Hello, Harold, you can quote me. The air in the room had thickened, congealing into a suffocating gelatin of judgment and expensive perfume. The circle that had formed around me and Madison felt less like a family gathering and more like a tribunal. I stood near the dessert table, the scent of chocolate fondue suddenly nauseating, while the rest of the room fell into a hush that was not respectful, but predatory. They were waiting for blood. They were waiting for the black sheep to finally be sheared. Madison swirled the liquid in her martini glass, the olive bobbing against the crystal like a drowned eye. She had that specific kind of liquid courage that turns unspoken grievances into public spectacles. She took a step closer to me, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, closing the physical distance until I could smell the gin on her breath. "So," Madison began, her voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room where my aunt was pretending to examine a painting. "Let us get down to brass tacks. Charlotte, we are all family here. We all love you. But this charade has gone on long enough." She gestured vaguely at my outfit, at my lack of jewelry, at the very space I occupied. "Do you have a plan?" Madison asked, tilting her head with a mock solicitude that was more insulting than a slap. "I mean a real plan, a realistic plan for your life. Or are you just going to keep playing with computers in the dark until you are 40? The question hung in the air, vibrating. It was the question they had all been asking behind my back for a decade. Finally given voice, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. My Uncle Jerry, my Aunt Linda, the cousins from out of state, they were all watching. They were not looking at me with malice, exactly, but with a profound, exhausting disappointment. They wanted me to admit it. They wanted me to say, "Yes, I am lost. Yes, I am a failure. Please help me." I looked at Madison. I looked at the smudge of red lipstick on her teeth. "I am working," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding my system. "I am working in data technology. It is going okay." "It is going okay," Madison repeated, mocking my flat tone. "Data technology, that is just a fancy word for fixing glitches, isn't it? It is just typing. It is not a career. Charlotte, it is a hobby that got out of hand." Before I could respond, Ethan stepped in. He moved with the smooth, practiced confidence of a man who has never been told to shut up. He placed a hand on Madison's shoulder, ostensibly to calm her, but his eyes were locked on me. "She is stubborn, Madison," Ethan said, his voice pitching into that jovial, half-joking register that allows men to say terrible things without consequence. "Basically, she refuses to grow up. I have told her 1,000 times. I literally offered to walk her resume into HR at Northbridge myself. I told her, 'Charlotte, I can get you a starting spot, full benefits, real money.' But no, she prefers the basement. She prefers the dark." He chuckled, shaking his head as if describing a toddler who refused to eat their vegetables. "I guess the real world is just too scary for some people." A ripple of laughter went through the room. It was nervous laughter, relieved laughter. Ethan had framed it as a quirk, a personality flaw rather than a tragedy. But Madison was not done. She shook off Ethan's hand. The alcohol had stripped away her social brakes, and she was careening toward the truth she had been dying to say all night. "No, Ethan, stop making excuses for her," Madison snapped. She turned her body fully toward me, blocking out the rest of the room. "It is not funny anymore. It is pathetic." She raised her glass, pointing it at me like an accusation. "Honestly, Charlotte," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, resonant register, "you are becoming the family embarrassment. You really are. You are smart. You went to a good school. You have every advantage in the world. And look at you. You have done absolutely nothing with it. You are almost 30 years old, and you have nothing to show for your life but a pile of old computer parts and a rental in a bad part of town. It is shameful." The word shameful landed like a physical blow. "Madison, honey," my mother's voice piped up from the side. It was weak, fluttery. "That is too much. You are going too far." I looked at my mother. I wanted her to be angry. I wanted her to storm over and slap the glass out of Madison's hand. I wanted her to defend her daughter with the ferocity she used to defend Ethan's football stats. But when I met her eyes, I didn't see anger. I saw fear. And beneath the fear, I saw agreement. She was not upset because Madison was lying. She was upset because Madison was saying the quiet part out loud. In her eyes, I saw the reflection of her own insecurity, the years of explaining me away to her friends, the years of inventing vague consulting jobs to cover the reality of her basement-dwelling daughter. I looked at my father. He was standing near the fireplace, holding his glass of expensive whiskey. He was the patriarch. He was the man whose birthday we were celebrating. He was the man who had taught me to ride a bike. He did not look at me. He looked down at the amber liquid in his glass, swirling it round and round, studying the vortex as if the secrets of the universe were trapped in the ice. He said nothing. His silence was a gavel coming down. Guilty, the silence said. Guilty of mediocrity. The room seemed to exhale. There was a collective sense of release. Finally, someone had popped the blister. Finally, the elephant in the room had been shot. I stood there, feeling the heat of the fire and the coldness of their hearts. 15 years. 15 years of being the other one. 15 years of Christmas mornings where my gifts were puzzles and Ethan's were keys to vehicles. 15 years of sitting at the edge of the table. 15 years of Charlotte is just going through a phase. 15 years of building a cathedral in the dark while they worshipped a strip mall in the sun. It all compressed into a single, dense point of singularity in my chest. I could have destroyed them then. I could have pulled out my phone and showed them the bank balance that was currently accruing interest at a rate higher than Madison's annual salary. I could have told them that the computer parts they mocked were currently processing the security protocols for the bank that held their mortgages, but I didn't. If I screamed, I was the crazy one. If I cried, I was the weak one. If I fought back, I was the immature one. I took a slow breath. I smoothed the front of my cheap, snagged sweater. I looked Madison in the eye, and then I looked at Ethan, and then at my parents. I understand, I said. My voice was soft, devoid of anger, devoid of tears. It was the voice of a data analyst reading a spreadsheet. Thank you for being honest. I know it has been hard for you all to watch me struggle. Madison blinked. She had expected a fight. She had expected a denial. My acceptance threw her off balance. She looked satisfied, smug even, feeling the rush of a successful intervention. She straightened up, smoothing her dress, believing she had just performed an act of tough love that would finally fix me. We just want what is best for you, Charlotte, Madison said, her tone shifting back to fake sweetness now that she had drawn blood. We just want you to wake up. I am awake, I said. The tension in the room began to dissipate. People started to turn back to their drinks. The show over. Ethan opened his mouth to make another joke, to smooth the rough edges of the moment and return the spotlight to himself. And then, the sound cut through the room. Bring. Bring. It was a sharp, trilling, digital sound. It was not the polite chime of a text message. It was the specific, urgent ringtone my father had programmed for his red phone contacts, his lawyer, his doctor, and his biggest clients. It was the sound that meant, stop everything. My father jumped slightly. He looked at his pocket, frowning. He pulled out the phone, squinting at the screen through his reading glasses. The room went quiet again, but this time it was a curious quiet. Who calls at 8 o'clock on a Saturday? Aunt Linda whispered. My father stared at the screen. His face went pale. He looked up, confused, his eyes darting to the window as if checking for a storm. It is Harold Lane, my father said, his voice trembling slightly. The journalist, Ethan asked, stepping closer. From the Business Chronicle. Why is he calling you? I don't know, my father said. I met him once at a gala 5 years ago. I didn't even know he had my cell. Put it on speaker, Ethan commanded, sensing an opportunity for importance. Maybe he wants a quote about the market, or maybe he heard about my promotion. My father hesitated, then tapped the screen. He held the phone out like a holy relic. Hello, my father said. Mr. Lane. The voice that filled the room was crisp, professional, and electric with the energy of breaking news. Mr. Phillips? Good evening. Harold Lane's voice boomed. I apologize for the intrusion, but I am on a deadline for the morning edition. I need a verification on a story we are running. A story, my father asked, standing a little straighter. Is this about Northbridge? No, sir, Harold Lane said. This is regarding the Forbes list release. I have been trying to reach your daughter's press team, but they are airtight. I need you to confirm Charlotte Phillips, your daughter. She is the sole beneficial owner of Quantifold Systems, correct? The air left the room. It didn't drift out. It vanished, leaving a vacuum that sucked the breath out of everyone's lungs. Excuse me, my father stammered. Quantifold. Yes, Quantifold Systems, Harold continued, impatient. The SEC filings just went public an hour ago for the IPO. The valuation is confirmed at $4.2 billion. We are running the headline, The Silent Billionaire. I just need to confirm she is the Charlotte Phillips from Maple Glen. The words hung there. Billionaire. 4.2 billion. Charlotte. Madison dropped her glass. It hit the floor with a shatter that sounded like a gunshot, sending shards of crystal and gin skittering across the polished wood. But nobody looked. Every single eye in the room slowly, mechanically, turned toward the corner, toward the dessert table, toward the coat pile, toward the failure. I stood there, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I watched the blood drain from Ethan's face. I watched my mother's hand fly to her mouth. I watched the arrogance in Madison's eyes curdle into a sheer, unadulterated terror. My father was still holding the phone, his hand shaking so hard the device was vibrating. Mr. Phillips, Harold Lane asked, are you there? Is she there? I stepped forward. The crowd parted for me. They didn't step aside. They recoiled, as if I were radioactive, as if the sheer density of the number 4 billion was physically pushing them back. I walked to the center of the room. I stopped in front of my father. I looked at the phone, then I looked at them. I looked at the family that had just called me a shame. I am here, I said. My voice was clear. It was the only steady thing in the world. The room was suspended in a fragile, brittle silence, the kind that usually precedes the shattering of glass. My father held the vibrating phone in his hand as if it were a live grenade that had somehow found its way into his living room. He squinted at the screen, his eyebrows knitting together in a mixture of confusion and sudden, reflexive reverence. It is Harold Lane, he repeated, his voice barely rising above a whisper. Yet in the quiet of the room, it sounded like a shout. For a man like my father, Harold Lane was not merely a journalist. He was the high priest of the financial world. My father had subscribed to the Business Chronicle for 30 years. He quoted Harold's editorials at the breakfast table. He treated Harold's market predictions as gospel. To receive a personal call from him on a Saturday night was akin to a devout Catholic receiving a direct line from the Vatican. The tension that had been directed at me moments ago, the collective, suffocating judgment of the family embarrassment suddenly shifted. It hung in the air, directionless, waiting for a new target. Quiet, everyone, my father commanded, holding up a hand, his chest puffed out slightly, a reflex of vanity that even the tension couldn't suppress. He looked at Ethan, then at the rest of the room, silently telegraphing the message. Witness this. Witness my importance. He pressed the answer button. Then, with a flourish of self-importance intended to impress the cousins and the neighbors, he tapped the speaker icon. Harold, my father said, his voice dropping an octave into his business baritone. To what do I owe the pleasure I am actually in the middle of a rather large family gathering? The voice that crackled through the speaker was not chatting. It was brisk, professional, and charged with the high-voltage energy of a newsroom on a deadline. Mr. Phillips, I apologize for the intrusion on your evening. Harold Lane's voice filled the room, bouncing off the crown molding and the framed photos of Ethan. I am on a strict deadline for the Sunday front page, and my fact-checkers are scrambling. I need a primary source verification immediately. My father smiled at the room, a tight, pleased smile. He assumed, naturally, that this was about him, or perhaps about Ethan. Perhaps the news of Ethan's promotion to vice president had reached the upper echelons of the press. He stood a little taller. Of course, Harold, my father said, leaning toward the phone. Always happy to help the Chronicle. What do you need to know? Is this about the market shift in the construction sector? No, Harold said, cutting him off. I need to confirm your relationship to the subject of our lead story. You are David Phillips, residing in Maple Glen, father of Charlotte Phillips, correct? The smile on my father's face faltered. It didn't disappear. It just froze, caught in a glitch between pride and confusion. The name Charlotte landed in the room with a dull thud. Charlotte, my father asked, blinking. He looked at me. I was still standing in the center of the room, my hands clasped, my face a mask of absolute calm. Yes, Charlotte is my daughter. She is right here, actually, but I don't see why. Excellent, Harold interrupted, his voice picking up speed. Mr. Phillips, could you please confirm for the record that your daughter, Charlotte Phillips, is the founder and chief executive officer of Quantifold Systems? The silence that followed was heavy, physical, and suffocating. It was not just that they didn't know the answer, it was that the question itself seemed to violate the laws of physics governing their universe. In their world, Charlotte was the failure. Charlotte was the basement dweller. Charlotte was the girl who needed a help desk job. Quantifold, my father repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. I think she consults for them. She does computer work. Yes. Consults. Harold let out a short, sharp laugh. Mr. Phillips, we have the SEC filings in front of us. The S1 was made public 40 minutes ago. We are looking at the cap table. We need you to confirm that she is the majority shareholder, retaining 51% of the equity post-IPO. My father looked at the phone, then he looked at me. His eyes were wide, glassy, and completely empty of understanding. I don't understand, he stammered into the speaker. Equity majority shareholder. Mr. Phillips, Harold's voice became sharper, impatient. I am asking you to confirm that your daughter is the individual who has just been named by Forbes as the youngest self-made billionaire in American history. We have the valuation of Quantifold Systems at opening tomorrow at $4.2 billion. We are running the headline, The Silent Tycoon. We just need to know if the family was aware of the extent of her holdings. $4.2 billion. The number hung in the air. It did not land like a feather. It landed like a meteor. It crashed into the center of the living room, obliterating the furniture, the ego, the pretension, and the hierarchy that had held this family together for decades. Ethan, who had been swirling his scotch, stopped moving. He stood absolutely still, his arm frozen in midair. I watched his face. I watched the blood drain out of it, leaving him the color of old paper. His eyes were locked on the phone, his mouth slightly open. He was a banker. He knew what an S1 filing was. He knew what majority shareholder meant. And most devastatingly, he knew what Quantifold was. He had spent the last 20 minutes bragging about Northbridge Capital's new tech stack. He had bragged about the institutional-grade software they had just licensed. He realized, in that fraction of a second, that he was not the vice president of the Northeast Division in the eyes of the world. He was a mid-level manager who had just unknowingly paid a licensing fee to his baby sister. Madison, who was standing 3 feet away from me, made a sound. It was a small, choked gasp. She went to put her martini glass down on the side table, but her depth perception had failed her. Her hand was shaking so violently that the stem of the glass clicked against the wood, tilted, and fell. Smash! The glass shattered. Gin and vermouth splashed onto the hardwood floor, soaking into the expensive Persian rug my mother loved. Nobody moved. Nobody looked at the broken glass. Nobody looked at the stains spreading across the wool. They were paralyzed by the sheer, crushing weight of the revelation. My father was still holding the phone, but his grip had slackened. He looked as if he had been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. He looked at the device, then he slowly, agonizingly, turned his head to look at me. "Billionaire," he whispered. The word sounded obscene coming from his mouth. It sounded impossible. You said billionaire. That is correct, Harold Lane said, his voice cheerful now that he sensed he had the scoop. Based on the preliminary pricing of the shares, Charlotte Phillips' net worth is estimated to be just over $4 billion. That puts her ahead of the heiress to the Walton fortune. It is quite a story. Mr. Phillips, the girl from Maple Glen who quietly built an empire. We were hoping to get a quote from you about how proud you must be. Did you know she was building this in your basement? The irony was so sharp it could have cut skin. Did you know she was building this in your basement? The basement? The place of shame. The place where they thought I was hiding from the world. The place where my mother had come down with laundry and pity, telling me to lower my expectations. The place where Ethan had joked I would rot. My mother was standing by the fireplace, her hands covering her mouth. Her eyes were darting back and forth between me and the phone, trying to reconcile the two images in her head, the daughter she had just apologized for, and the titan of industry the voice on the phone was describing. My father choked. He couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. He looked at me, pleadingly. He wanted me to tell him it was a prank. He wanted me to tell him that Harold Lane was confused, that I was just a consultant, that I was just Charlotte the failure, because if I was a billionaire, then who was he? If I was the success, then what was his judgment worth if I had built an empire in the dark while they laughed in the light? Then every single thing they had said to me for 15 years was not just wrong, it was a sin. I looked at him. I looked at the fear in his eyes. Mr. Phillips, Harold asked again, are you there? My father didn't answer. He couldn't. I stepped forward. I walked past Madison, who shrank back as if my very presence would burn her. I walked past Ethan, who looked like a statue of a fallen general. I walked right up to my father. I gently took the phone from his shaking hand. Hello, Harold, I said into the speaker. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when I was negotiating with hedge funds. It was the voice of authority. Charlotte, Harold's voice brightened. Ms. Phillips, finally, I have been trying to get through your firewall for 3 days. Congratulations on the IPO filing. Thank you, Harold, I said. Can we confirm the numbers? Harold asked. 4.2 billion. The valuation is accurate, I said. Based on the pre-market order book, we might actually open closer to 4.5, but let us be conservative. 4.5. I heard my Uncle Jerry wheeze. He was clutching his chest. My Aunt Linda had grabbed the back of the sofa to steady herself. Fantastic, Harold said, typing furiously on the other end. And your father? He seemed surprised. I take it you kept the scale of the operation under wraps? I looked around the room. I looked at the Good Luck Charlotte spot on the table where my graduation cake had been. I looked at the corner where they had seated me tonight, next to the Coates. I looked at Madison, who had called me the family embarrassment 5 minutes ago. I looked at Ethan, the golden boy, whose entire net worth was a rounding error on my daily interest accrual. I looked at my parents. They looked small. They looked terrified. They were realizing that the daughter they had treated as a broken object was actually the one holding the deed to their reality. Yes, Harold, I said into the phone, my eyes locking with my father's. We kept it very quiet. My family believes in humility. They have always taught me that success doesn't need to be loud to be real. I saw my mother flinch. It was a mercy kill. I had given them a way out. I had framed their ignorance as virtue. I had framed their neglect as a lesson in modesty. That is a beautiful angle, Harold said. The humble roots of America's newest tycoon. Maple Glen must be very proud. Can I get a quote from your brother? I see here he works in finance. He must have been a great mentor to you. Ethan's head snapped up. He looked at me with sheer panic. He knew. He knew that if I told the truth that he had mocked me, belittled me, and tried to hire me as ET support, his reputation would be incinerated. He knew that I held his social life, his career, and his dignity in the palm of my hand. He looked at me with the eyes of a drowning man. Please, his eyes begged, please don't destroy me. I looked at him. I remembered the Christmas Eve he called me the family embarrassment. I remembered the way he laughed when I said I was working on a project. I smiled. It was a cold smile. My brother has been very consistent, I said into the phone. He always told me exactly where I belonged. I wouldn't be here today without his perspective. Ethan exhaled, his shoulders slumping. He didn't know if it was a compliment or a curse, but it wasn't a public execution. Wonderful, Harold said. Look, I know it is a party. I won't keep you. We run the story at 6 a.m. Prepare yourself, Ms. Phillips. Your life is about to change. My life changed a long time ago. Harold, I said. The world is just catching up. Good night, Ms. Phillips. Good night. I pressed the red button to end the call. The silence that returned to the room was different now. It was not brittle. It was absolute. It was the silence of a cathedral after the bell has stopped tolling. I held the phone in my hand for a moment, then held it out to my father. He didn't take it. He just stared at me, his hands trembling by his sides. He looked at me as if he had never seen me before, and in a way, he hadn't. He had looked at a projection of his own disappointment for 29 years. This was the first time he was seeing Charlotte. $4 billion, Madison whispered from the side of the room. She sounded like she was in physical pain. She is worth $4 billion. My mother took a step toward me. Her hands were shaking. She reached out, as if to touch my arm, but then pulled back, unsure if she was allowed to touch me anymore. Charlotte, she whispered. Her voice was cracked, broken. You all this time in the basement? Yes, Mom, I said. In the basement. But why? My father asked, his voice hoarse. Why didn't you tell us? We worried about you. We thought you thought I was a failure. I finished the sentence for him. He flinched. We thought you were lost. I wasn't lost, I said. I was working, but every time I tried to talk about it, you asked me if I was fixing printers. Every time I tried to show you, you told me to be realistic. You didn't want to know what I was doing. You wanted me to fit into the box you had made for me, the box labeled Family Embarrassment. I looked at the spot on the rug where the gin was soaking in. Well, I said, looking around the room at the stunned faces of my relatives, I think I have outgrown the box. I walked over to the coat pile. I picked up my jacket, the cheap, worn denim jacket that Madison had sneered at earlier. I put it on. Where are you going? Ethan asked. His voice was small, stripped of all its corporate bravado. I have a meeting with the underwriters in Zurich at 4 a.m., I said, buttoning my jacket. I need to get back to my office. Charlotte, wait, my mother cried out, tears finally spilling over. Please, don't go like this. It is your father's birthday. We can celebrate. We can toast to you. No, I said gently. You can't. I looked at them one last time. You can't celebrate the harvest when you despise the seed, I said. I turned and walked toward the door. The crowd parted instantly, giving me a wide berth, looking at me with awe and terror. I walked out of the living room, down the hallway where my school photos had been taken down to make room for Ethan's awards, and opened the front door. The cold air hit my face. It felt clean. It felt real. Behind me, the house was silent. They were left with the champagne, the expensive catering, and the crushing realization that the most valuable thing in their lives had just walked out the door, and no amount of apologies would ever afford them a way back in. The silence that followed the end of the call was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the invisible, crushing weight of a paradigm shift. I stood in the center of the Persian rug, the smell of spilled gin still sharp in the air. Watching the people who had defined me for 29 years attempt to rewrite their entire understanding of reality in the span of a few seconds. It was Madison who moved first. Of course it was. She was a creature of public perception, and she needed external validation to process what her ears had just heard. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers fumbling over the screen, her acrylic nails clicking frantically against the glass. I watched her type. I knew exactly what she was typing. She was typing my name, She didn't have to scroll far. "Oh my God," Madison whispered. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a time-lapse of a wilting flower. She turned the phone outward, holding it up like a shield, or perhaps a white flag. On the screen, the Forbes homepage was live. The headline was bold, black, and undeniable: "The Silent Tycoon: How Charlotte Phillips Built a $4 billion Empire from the Shadows." And there was the photo. It was not a photo taken at a family barbecue. It was a professional headshot taken 6 months ago in my Kingsport office. In the image, I was wearing a simple black blazer, the same kind of boring clothes they mocked me for. I was looking directly into the camera lens with a gaze that was sharp, unsmiling, and uncompromising. Behind me, the sleek, illuminated logo of Quantifold Systems glowed in the low light. It was the face of a predator. It was the face of a woman who owned the board, not the face of a girl who sat at the kids' table. "It is real," Madison choked out, looking from the screen to me and back again, as if trying to spot the difference between the billionaire in the pixelated image and the cousin in the snag sweater. "It says her liquidity event is projected to be the largest in the sector since Facebook. It says she owns the underlying architecture for everything." The room seemed to tilt. I saw my Aunt Linda grip the back of the sofa, her eyes wide. I saw my Uncle Jerry, the man who measured success by the size of a pickup truck, open his mouth and close it again, looking like a fish on a dock. But it was Ethan who was suffering the most acute form of vertigo. His phone began to vibrate. Then it chimed. Then it vibrated again. A cascade of notifications lit up his screen, illuminating his pale, shocked face in the dim light of the living room. He looked down, almost against his will. I knew what was happening. The news had broken. The press release had gone out. And in the incestuous, hyper-connected world of high finance, news like this travels faster than light. Ethan stared at his screen. I could see the reflection of the text bubbles in his eyes. Ping. "Dude, did you see the Chronicle is Charlotte Phillips, your sister?" Ping. "Ethan, please tell me you knew about this. The MD is asking if we have a direct line to Quantifold ownership." Ping. "Holy shit. We just signed the licensing deal with them last week. Your sister is technically our vendor. Does this mean we get a discount?" Ethan looked up at me. For the first time in his life, he did not look at me with the eyes of a big brother. He did not look at me with the eyes of a protector, or a mentor, or a superior. He looked at me with the terrified, deferential eyes of a middle manager looking at the chairman of the board. He realized, with a sickening lurch of his stomach, that the institutional-grade software he had been bragging about all night, the software he claimed was the savior of his department, was written by the girl he had offered a help desk job to. "You," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "Northbridge. We run on your engine. The risk simulation. It is you." "It is me," I confirmed, my voice cool and level. "We rolled out the patch for your bond pricing module last Tuesday. You were having latency issues. I fixed it." Ethan flinched as if I had slapped him. "I fixed it." The simplicity of the sentence destroyed him. I hadn't just fixed a computer. I had fixed the very thing he built his reputation on, and I had done it while he was telling me to grow up. "But how?" my mother stammered. She had stepped away from the fireplace, moving toward me with a strange, hesitant gait. She looked at the room around us, the old furniture, the familiar wallpaper, the ceiling that separated the living room from the basement below. "You did this down there," she whispered, pointing a trembling finger toward the floor. "In the basement, with those old machines." Her voice was a cocktail of pride and horror. She was proud because the number 4 billion was incomprehensible, but she was horrified because she realized she had been living on top of a gold mine and complaining about the noise. She realized that while she was worrying about me wasting my life, I was generating more value per square foot in her basement than the entire housing development of Summit Heights combined. "I did it where I could afford the rent, Mom," I said gently. My Uncle Jerry, the construction magnate, who had spent the last decade telling me to get real and asking if I could fix his printer, suddenly cleared his throat. The transformation was instantaneous and grotesque. He straightened his tie, pushed a smile onto his face, and stepped forward, pushing past a stunned cousin. "Charlotte," Jerry said, his voice booming with a false, oily conviviality. "You know, I always said you had a head for numbers. I told your father. That girl is plotting something big. I knew it." He didn't know it. He had called me the AT girl behind my back for years. "Listen," Jerry continued, ignoring the cold stare I gave him. "If you are expanding, and with that kind of capital, you must be looking at physical infrastructure, data centers, server farms. You know my firm handles commercial grading. If you need a partner who understands the family values, you let me know. We can do a walkthrough next week." He was pitching me. The body was not even cold, the body of the failure Charlotte, and he was already pitching the billionaire Charlotte. I looked at him. I let the silence stretch until he began to sweat. "I have a facilities manager for that. Uncle Jerry," I said. "I believe his name is on the website. You can submit a bid through the public portal like everyone else." Jerry's smile faltered, but he nodded quickly. "Right. The portal? Of course. Professional. I like it." From the corner, Madison let out a small, strangled sound. She had picked up a napkin and was dabbing at the spilled gin on her dress, but her eyes were locked on me. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck made of money. She had just spent 20 minutes dissecting my life, mocking my clothes, and calling me a charity case, and now she realized that I could buy the pharmaceutical company she worked for and turn its headquarters into a parking lot just for sport. "Charlotte, Madison began, her voice high and thin. "You know I was just drinking. I didn't mean, obviously, I didn't know." "You didn't know about the money," I corrected her. "That is the only thing that changed. Madison, I am the same person I was 5 minutes ago. I am wearing the same sweater. I have the same job. The only difference is, now you know the price tag." She flinched. The truth was a mirror she couldn't bear to look into. She wasn't sorry she had been cruel. She was sorry she had been cruel to someone powerful. "I am sorry," she whispered, looking down at the wet rug. "I know," I said. My father finally moved. He took a step toward me, closing the distance between us. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. The bravado of his birthday, the pride of Ethan's promotion, it had all evaporated, leaving a confused, frightened man holding a glass of whiskey that suddenly felt very heavy. He looked at me, searching my face for the daughter he thought he knew. "Charlotte," he said, his voice shaking. Why couldn't you just tell us 15 years? Honey, we could have helped." The unfairness of the question almost made me laugh. "We could have helped." "Helped?" I asked softly. "Dad, do you remember when I asked for a loan of $5,000 to buy the first bank of servers? You told me to stop playing games and get a job at the mall." He winced, the memory hitting him. "Do you remember when I tried to show you the first algorithm?" I continued, keeping my voice calm, factual. "I brought the laptop to the dinner table. You told me to put it away because we were celebrating Ethan's touchdown." "We didn't understand," he pleaded. "We didn't know what we were looking at." "You didn't try," I said. "I tried to tell you. I tried to explain the data. I tried to explain the contracts. But every time I opened my mouth, you heard the word computer, and your eyes glazed over. You filtered everything I said through the lens of hobby. You only respect things you can put on a mantelpiece. Dad, trophies, plaques, titles. Code is invisible, so to you, I was invisible." "That is not true," my mother cried out, tears streaming down her face. "We loved you. We worried." "You worried I would embarrass you," I said. "And I did. I embarrassed you by not being Ethan. I embarrassed you by not following the script. And now?" I gestured to the room, to the stunned faces, to the broken glass, to the phone in Ethan's hand that was still vibrating with messages from people who realized the hierarchy had shifted. "Now I am embarrassing you because I succeeded in a way that makes your script look small." I took a deep breath. I wasn't angry. The anger had burned out years ago, fueling the late nights in the basement. What was left was just a cool, clean clarity. I looked at Ethan. He was still staring at me, stripping away the layers of his own ego. He realized that every bonus he had ever bragged about, every deal he had ever closed, was a game played in a sandbox that I now owned. "I didn't do this to hurt you," I said to the room. "I didn't hide it to trick you. I hid it because it was the only way I could work without your judgment. I needed the silence. The basement wasn't a punishment. Mom, it was a sanctuary." I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. The room was spinning with unspoken apologies and calculations. People trying to figure out how to pivot, how to reframe the past 15 years to make themselves look like supportive visionaries instead of neglectful bystanders. "I have to go," I said again. "My team is waiting in Zurich." "Charlotte," Ethan said, taking a step forward. He looked desperate. "Wait, the bank Northbridge. If they find out I am your brother and I didn't know, they are going to think I am incompetent. They are going to think I am frozen out." It was a valid fear. In his world, access was everything. If the vice president of the division didn't even know his own sister was the vendor, he looked like a fool. I looked at him. I could have left him there. I could have let him twist in the wind. It would have been poetic justice. But I looked at his face. I saw the 17-year-old boy who mocked my motherboard, but I also saw the brother who, in his own misguided, arrogant way, had actually wanted me to have health insurance. He was a product of this environment, just as much as I was. He was just the one who drank the Kool-Aid, while I was the one who analyzed the chemical composition. "I won't let you drown, Ethan," I said. He exhaled, his knees almost buckling with relief. "But things are going to be different," I said. "The next time we talk about business, you are going to listen. You aren't going to talk about your golf game. You aren't going to talk about your bonus. You are going to listen to the data. Can you do that?" Ethan nodded. He nodded vigorously, like a child promising to be good. "I will. I promise. I will listen." "Good," I said. I turned to my parents. "Happy birthday. Dad, I left your gift on the table in the hall. It is a donation in your name to the computer science department at the local high school. They are naming the new lab after the family." My father looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. There were no words left in the old vocabulary that fit this new world. I didn't wait for a thank you. I didn't wait for a hug. I turned and walked toward the foyer. The sound of my sneakers on the hardwood, the only sound in the house. I walked past the coats, past the judgments, past the 15 years of not enough. As I reached for the doorknob, I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my life. The secret was out. The bomb had detonated, and I was the only one left standing in the rubble, completely untouched. I had my hand on the doorknob, ready to leave the house that had been a museum of my alleged inadequacies for nearly 3 decades. The cold brass felt good against my palm, a solid anchor to the reality I had built outside these walls. But before I could turn it, a sound sliced through the heavy, stunned silence of the foyer. It was not a ringtone this time. It was the frantic, repetitive ping of a high-priority email notification. It came from Ethan's pocket. He looked down, almost reflexively. In his world, you never ignored a priority alert, even if your sister had just been revealed as a billionaire who could buy your bank. He pulled the phone out, his movements stiff and mechanical, like a marionette whose strings had been cut. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I watched the color, which had already drained from his face, somehow drain even further, leaving him looking translucent. "What is it?" my father asked, his voice weak. He was sitting on the hallway bench, looking at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Ethan looked up. He looked at me. His expression was a complex tapestry of horror, realization, and a crushing, belated respect. "It is an internal memo," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "From the board of directors at Northbridge. It is marked urgent for all senior leadership." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "They are announcing a strategic pivot." Ethan continued, reading from the screen. The bank has identified Quantifold Systems as a mission-critical partner for the next 5-year growth cycle. They are mandating an immediate outreach to the CEO to secure a long-term exclusivity agreement before the IPO goes broad. They are terrified that if we lose access to the engine, our risk modeling will collapse within a quarter. He looked at me. The phone hung loosely in his hand. The CEO, Ethan whispered. They want me to set up a meeting with the CEO. They want me to call you. I took my hand off the doorknob and turned back to face him. Well, I said calmly, you can tell them you have established contact, but the exclusivity agreement will cost them an extra 15%. The enterprise tier is expensive. Ethan let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He leaned against the wall, sliding down slightly until he was bracing himself with his hands. I could see the memory playing out behind his eyes. I could see it as clearly as if it were projected on the wallpaper. 10 years ago, I had come to him with a proposal. I needed $5,000 to upgrade my server capacity because I had hit a bottleneck in my processing speed. I had brought a spreadsheet. I had brought a projection of returns. I remembered his laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh, which made it worse. It was a dismissive laugh. He had patted my head and said, Charlotte, don't dream. Use that big brain of yours for something real. Get a job. Stop playing pretend. He was remembering it too. I saw the flinch. He realized that the $5,000 he had refused to invest would have been worth roughly $200 million today. He had laughed away a fortune because he couldn't see past the hoodie in the basement. My parents, standing in the doorway of the living room, absorbed this. They were not financial experts, but they understood power. They understood leverage. They realized that the hierarchy of our family, the pyramid with Ethan at the top and me at the bottom, had not just been inverted, it had been pulverized. My father looked at Ethan, then at me. He realized that his son's career, the source of so much boastful pride at so many dinner parties, was now entirely dependent on the goodwill of the daughter he had tried to hide. I need a drink of water, Ethan mumbled. He pushed himself off the wall and walked unsteadily toward the kitchen. I hesitated. Then I followed him. The kitchen was bright and sterile. The catering staff had left, leaving behind trays of half-eaten appetizers and empty wine bottles. It was the backstage of the performance that had just been canceled. Ethan was standing at the sink, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't drinking water. He was just staring out the window into the dark backyard. I stood in the doorway. You need to tell your compliance officer that the conflict of interest disclosures need to be filed by Monday, I said. Since we are siblings, the SEC will look closely at any deal Northbridge signs with Quantifold. Ethan turned around. He looked exhausted. The polished veneer of the vice president was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a man who had realized he was standing on a foundation of sand. I am sorry, he said. It was simple. It was quiet. I am not just sorry about the money, Ethan said, looking down at his expensive Italian shoes. I mean, obviously, I feel like an idiot about the investment, but I am sorry about the way I treated you. I thought I was helping. I thought I was the one who knew how the world worked. I thought you were just lost. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. I was so arrogant, he admitted. I came in here tonight, bragging about a ski trip, bragging about a bonus that you probably make in a day, and you just stood there. You let me talk. You didn't say a word. I didn't need to, I said. No, he shook his head. You didn't, and that makes it worse. You have more dignity in your little finger than I have in my whole career. He took a deep breath. Straightening up, he adjusted his tie, not out of vanity, but out of a need to compose himself. I want to help, Ethan said, and I don't mean that in the patronizing way I meant it before. I mean, I know Northbridge. I know how these sharks think. They are going to try to lowball you. They are going to try to lock you into a restrictive covenant. I can navigate that for you. I can be the buffer. I studied him. I looked for the angle. I looked for the ego, but I didn't see it. I saw a man who had been humbled, truly humbled. for the first time in his life. "I don't need saving, Ethan," I said. "I have a team of lawyers who eat sharks for breakfast." "I know," he nodded. "But do you have someone who knows exactly what the board at Northbridge is afraid of? Do you have someone who knows where the bodies are buried in their risk department?" I paused. That was true. He did have inside information. He did have value. "Quantifold is going to need a liaison," I said slowly. "Someone to manage the integration with the legacy banking systems. It is a grueling job. It involves long hours, listening to engineers who are smarter than you, and executing orders without question. It is not a glamour role. There are no ski trips to Silver Ridge." Ethan listened. "The question is," I continued, looking him dead in the eye, "can you handle working under the family embarrassment? Can you handle taking orders from your little sister? Can you handle walking into a meeting room and sitting on the side of the table where you have to listen, not talk?" Ethan looked at me. He looked at the refrigerator where our mother used to hang his report cards, but threw mine in a drawer. He looked at the ghost of the boy who thought he was the king of the world. He swallowed his pride. I watched it go down. It was a hard pill, but he swallowed it. "If that is what it takes," Ethan said quietly, "if that is how I make it right, then yes, I am ready." "Good," I said. "Call my assistant on Monday. Do not call me. Call my assistant. Her name is Sarah. She will set up an interview." "An interview," he repeated, a small, wry smile touching his lips. "Right. Okay. I will call Sarah." "Come on," I said. "Let us finish this." I walked back into the living room. Ethan followed me, a step behind, literalizing the new order of things. The room was exactly as I had left it. My parents were sitting on the sofa, looking like survivors of a natural disaster. Madison was sitting in a chair in the corner, staring at the wall. The rest of the relatives were standing in awkward clumps, whispering. When I walked in, the whispering stopped. I went to the center of the room. I didn't sit down. I stood where I had stood when the call came in. "I am leaving now," I announced. "But before I go, I want to say one thing." My mother looked up. Her eyes were red. "Charlotte." "For 8 years," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I worked 18-hour days. I missed holidays. I ate instant noodles. I slept on a cot next to a server rack that generated so much heat I had to keep the window open in January. I was rejected by 42 investors before the first one said yes. I built this company brick by brick, line of code by line of code." I looked at my Uncle Jerry. "It wasn't magic," I said, "and it wasn't luck, and it certainly wasn't a hobby. It was work. It was the hardest work anyone in this family has ever done." I looked at my father. "If Forbes hadn't called tonight," I said, "if the number 4 billion hadn't been spoken out loud, you would still be looking at me with pity. You would still be thinking I was a failure, and that is the problem. The problem isn't that I lived differently than you expected. The problem is that you only respect what you can see. You only respect the suit, the car, the title. You never bothered to look at the person." I let that sink in. "The money doesn't make me successful," I said. "The money is just the receipt for the work. I was successful when I was in the basement, solving problems that no one else could solve. I was successful when I was broke, because I was building something real. You just couldn't see it because it didn't come with a trophy." The silence was profound. It was a cleansing silence. The pretense was gone. The "we just want you to be happy" lies were gone. Madison stood up. She looked small. She walked over to me. "I was jealous," she said, her voice shaking. "I have always been jealous of you. You were free. You didn't care what people thought. I am drowning in debt trying to look rich. And you were actually becoming rich while wearing a $10 sweater. I am sorry. Charlotte, I was cruel because I was unhappy." "Thank you, Madison," I said. "I accept your apology." My mother stood up. She walked over to me and hugged me. It was a fierce, desperate hug. "I am so sorry," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I am so sorry I didn't believe in you. I am so sorry I tried to make you small. I hugged her back. It wasn't the warm, fuzzy hug of a Hallmark movie. It was the hug of two adults coming to terms with the fact that their relationship had been broken and might never be fully fixed, but could at least be honest. "It is okay, Mom," I said. We moved forward. I pulled away. I looked at my father. He was weeping silently. He couldn't even stand up. He just raised his hand in a wave of surrender and apology. I nodded to him. I walked to the door. This time, no one stopped me. No one offered me a plate of food. No one told me to get a haircut. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear, like I was a creature from another dimension who had briefly visited their small world. I walked out onto the porch. The night air was crisp. The stars were visible above the light pollution of the suburbs. I looked back at the house. Through the window, I could see them. They looked like actors on a stage after the curtain had fallen, unsure of what to do with their hands, unsure of who they were now that the protagonist had left the script. I walked to my car, my beat-up, 10-year-old sedan. I got in. The engine sputtered a little as it started. I thought about the $4 billion. I thought about the private jet I could buy tomorrow. I thought about the penthouse in Manhattan I was looking at. But mostly, I thought about the silence in that room when the reporter said my name. That was the revenge. It wasn't about hurting them. It wasn't about yelling. It was about forcing them to look at the truth until it burned their eyes. It was about making them realize that the embarrassment was the only thing that mattered. I put the car in gear and drove away from Maple Glen. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who I was. And for the first time in my life, I knew that they knew it too. And that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to Charlotte's story. It is a journey that reminds us that sometimes the quietest people are making the loudest noise. I would love to hear from you. Please comment down below and tell me where you are listening to this story from. Let us connect and share our thoughts on family, expectations, and success. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story out to more people who might need to hear it. See you in the next one.